excuse rules and
Africa, the future of our nation immigration is in no way a solution. Rather, it is draining our country of its human resources, which are so precious. In addition, technological and digital advances must serve the interests of all. Therefore, we are advocating universal access to technological innovations while ensuring that ethics remain at the heart of their use, as said by François Rabelais. Science without conscience is the ruin of the soul. Ladies and gentlemen, today we are calling for the nations to come together around a common vision, that of a world that places humans at the heart of every thought and action. Together we can overcome the most difficult challenges. We can quell tensions and embrace a lasting peace. The world is waiting for us to do this. The United Nations was born to promote international peace and security, and it must act while there is still time to silence weapons and bombing. As for Guinea, as a sovereign and determined nation, will forge its own destiny, and it stands firmly on the international scene with a clear and independent vision. 1 year ago, at this very podium, our head of state, General Mamadi Doumbouya, declared clearly our commitment to the interests of Africa with entire sovereignty, without being influenced by contradictory interests coming from outside the continent. Today, this principle continues to guide our actions. We favor above all else the development and prosperity of our continent. Such is the will of His Excellency General of the Armed Forces, Mamadi Doumbouya, and the people of Guinea, that our actions today forge a future of peace and light for all. Long live peace, together for a better world. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister, Head of Government of the Republic of Guinea. The Assembly will hear an address by His Eminence Cardinal Pietro Parolin, Secretary of State of the Holy See. I request protocol to escort His Eminence and invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, I am honored to extend to you and to the representatives of the nations assembled here, the warm greetings of His Holiness Pope Francis, while also congratulating Your Excellency on your election as President of this esteemed Assembly. Mr. President, the Holy See is deeply concerned that we are witnessing a worrying increase in the number of conflicts worldwide and the severity of their violence. These conflicts are responsible for a significant loss of innocent life and a vast amount of destruction. 75 years after the ratification of the Geneva Conventions, humanitarian law is still being undermined and increasingly being violated. The targeting of places of worship, educational institutions, medical facilities, and other civil infrastructure is a prevalent phenomenon. The Holy See calls for the strict observance of international humanitarian law in all armed conflicts. The situation becomes more complex when one considers the destabilizing role often played by violent non-state actors in many of the crises around the globe. It is imperative that these groups seek a constructive engagement with states, renounce violence and acts of terrorism, and enter into legality. Peace is only possible if it is wanted. The pursuit of peace is a collective responsibility. It is imperative to move beyond rhetoric and the tendency to ascribe blame. However, the reality is that there is no genuine commitment to achieving peace. In times of conflict, there is often a tendency to prioritize military victory over the pursuit of peace. It is incumbent upon diplomacy to demonstrate unwavering dedication to pursuing every avenue for negotiation to establish enduring peace. To pursue peace, however, it is not enough simply to eliminate the instruments of war. Its root causes must be eradicated. Foremost among these is hunger, a scourge that continues to afflict entire areas of our world, while others are marked by massive waste of food. Nevertheless, the prevailing tendency has been to maintain the growth in military expenditure while striving to fulfill the commitments made on sustainable development. Pope Francis appeals to rich countries to acknowledge the gravity of so many of their past decisions and determine to forgive the debts of countries that will never be able to repay them. It is easy to become complacent and resigned in the face of the constant stream of new forms of poverty. However, this dramatic situation can be encountered all around us, not only in certain parts of the world. This is the case, for example, of the modern phenomenon of homelessness. Poverty has a particularly detrimental impact on women, often trapping them in a vicious cycle of unfortunate circumstances, resulting in isolation and abandonment before they are forced to make desperate and unwelcome decisions. Pope Francis says, the path to peace calls for respect for life, for every human life, starting with the life of the unborn child in the mother's womb, which cannot be suppressed or turned into an objective of trafficking. The practice of so-called surrogate motherhood represents a grave violation of the dignity of both the woman and the child, based on the exploitation of situation of the mother's material needs. The Holy See hopes for an effort by the international community to prohibit this practice universally. The dignity of migrants must be upheld. People seeking refuge must be not rejected, but welcomed with respect and a sense of humanity. Another affront to human dignity is trafficking human beings. This illegal and above all dehumanizing practice must be stopped and the traffickers brought to justice. Closely related to the dignity of human life is the care of our common home. The effects of climate change are borne by the poorest countries, who contribute the least to it, but are those who carry the greatest burden of its effects. Opportunities and risks are also given by the rise of new technologies, particularly artificial intelligence. There is a need to ensure and safeguard the space for proper human control over choices made by artificial intelligence. In light of the tragedy that is armed conflict, it is urgent to reconsider the development and use of devices like the so-called lethal autonomous weapons, and ultimately ban their use. No machine should ever choose to take the life of a human being. There is a necessity for the establishment of a binding ethical and regulatory framework to be negotiated both within the non-military and military domains. The Holy See is convinced that a world free from nuclear weapons is both necessary and possible. The goal of a world free of nuclear weapons can only be achieved through discussions based on mutual trust. It is evident that the adherence to and respect for international disarmament agreements and international law should not be perceived as a form of weakness. The Holy See renews its call for a total and complete disarmament. Unfortunately, as Pope Francis says, we are witnessing a third world war fought piecemeal. In the midst of the ongoing tragedy of the Russian war in Ukraine, we are faced with a situation that calls for urgent action to prevent further escalation and to create a path towards a just and peaceful resolution. While diplomatic efforts are crucial, it is evident that military engagement continues to prevail. It is therefore essential to find ways to encourage gestures of goodwill and spaces for direct dialogue between the parties involved. The Holy See continues to be worried about the ongoing stability in the Middle East, particularly following the terrorist attack of 7 October 2023 in Israel by Hamas and other armed Palestinian groups. However, the military response by Israel, considering the high number of civilian casualties, raises many questions about its proportionality. The Holy See calls for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the West Bank, as well as the release of Israeli hostages in Gaza, and urges humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian population. The Holy See reaffirmed that the only viable solution is a two-state solution with Jerusalem having a special status. The Holy See expresses serious concern regarding the situation in Jerusalem, where several discriminations and harassments are taking place, hindering the peaceful coexistence for Christians, Jews, and Muslims. It condemns all anti-Christian acts perpetrated months ago by a minority of Jewish individuals and calls on the authorities to continue confronting this ideological deviation firmly and clearly. The current situation in Lebanon represents a significant cause for concern for the Holy See. The ongoing intensification of the conflict between Hezbollah and the Israeli military is putting at high risk the whole region. The Holy See demands that all parties adhere to the principles of international humanitarian law and halt the escalation and enter into a ceasefire without delay. Furthermore, the Holy See highlights the humanitarian crisis in Syria and urges the international community to do more in supporting the Syrian people who feel hopeless about their future. The ongoing armed conflict in Sudan has resulted in an unprecedented humanitarian crisis, with displaced persons, particularly women and children, succumbing to starvation and malnutrition. The Holy See urges the international community to promote peace negotiations and provide the population with vital humanitarian aid. The Holy See calls for more humanitarian support in the Cabo Delgado province in Mozambique, affected by armed conflict for 7 years now, with almost 905,000 internally displaced persons who are facing alarming levels of suffering, insecurity, and poverty. The situation in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo is deteriorating rapidly, leading to a disturbing increase in the humanitarian crisis. The withdrawal of the MONUSCO by the end of the year is likely to create a security vacuum. It is crucial to continue supporting diplomatic efforts to find an appropriate and sustainable solution to the ongoing conflict. The Holy See follows with great preoccupation the social political situation in South Sudan, aggravated by the humanitarian crisis, the recent floods, and the conflict. It calls on the international community to show solidarity with the population and urges all the country's leaders to place the well-being of the people at the center of their political agenda. The spread of jihadist threats in the Gulf of Guinea is causing concern for the security of not just the Sahel, but all of West Africa. Christians are being targeted, while climate change and armed attacks are worsening the food crisis and causing children to drop out of school. Immediate and long-term action is needed to prevent a loss of education and stability in the region. The Holy See is following the dramatic situation in Haiti with apprehension and hopes that the steps that are being taken with the support of the international community to establish democratic order and stop the violence will lead to peace and reconciliation in the country. The dramatic situation and the dire need for humanitarian aid in Myanmar, which has been exacerbated by an increase in armed conflict in recent months and made worse by severe flooding, are also a source of deep concern. The Holy See calls on all parties to seek a durable, peaceful solution to the situation and to ensure access for humanitarian aid to all affected communities without prejudice. The Holy See follows with great attention to what is happening in Nicaragua. It is in particular concerned about the measures taken against the personnel and institutions of the Church, which directly affect the sensitive issues of religious freedom. It is hoped that in conjunction with the other fundamental rights of individuals and society, this freedom will be adequately guaranteed. For its part, the Holy See is open to respectful and constructive dialogue with the authorities of the country, with a view to resolving difficulties and promoting peace, fraternity, and harmony for the benefit of all. The recent presidential elections in Venezuela have demonstrated that despite the numerous challenges faced, the Venezuelan people continue to place their trust in the democratic values enshrined in the Constitution. These democratic values are founded upon the sovereignty of the people, which is expressed through the act of voting. In the serious crisis that followed the announcement of the result, with several deaths, numerous detentions, also of minors, and the use of violence, the Holy See, deeply saddened and worried, appeals to the authorities of the country and to all those who have any responsibility for what has happened to respect and protect the life, dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms of its citizens. Furthermore, it calls upon them to seek ways to resolve the present situation for the good of all, including with the assistance of members of the international community who have declared themselves willing to help in a flexible and reasonable manner. The Holy See encourages the talks between Armenia and Azerbaijan so that they may continue the dialogue, assist the displaced persons, respect the places of worship of the different religious denominations, and reach a final peace treaty between the parties as soon as possible. The Holy See looks also favorably on the aspiration of the Balkans countries to join the European Union and hopes that this objective will be achieved as soon as possible. While disarmament fosters peace among nations, there is also a need to foster peace within societies through democracy. It is the result of a considered and committed acceptance of the values that inspire democratic procedures. Democracy is founded upon the tenets of freedom of expression and the fundamental principle of the respect for the will of the people. This implies that changes in the holders of power can occur. However, there is an increasing tendency to alter constitutions or to modify electoral rules and procedures for the purpose of remaining in power. Democracy entails respect for the established rules and the recognition of the expressed will of the people. Pope Francis made it clear that the path to peace calls for respect for human rights. Regrettably, in recent decades, attempts have been made to introduce new rights, leading to instances of ideological colonization, in which gender theory plays a central role. The latter cancels differences in its claim to make everyone equal. It does not even help ensuring the harmony between women and men. It is also inconceivable to associate the concept of right with the practice of abortion, which involves the taking of an innocent life. The Holy See is profoundly alarmed that some of the most common violations of human rights occur in the area of religious freedom. Christians are the most vulnerable in this regard, where 1 in 7 are subjected to persecution. Mr. President, there is a need to recover the roots, the spirit, and the values that gave rise to this organization, while at the same time taking into account the changed context. The first and most necessary reform needed is the return to a sincere and open dialogue. It is evident that without dialogue and an open exchange of perspectives, even when there is disagreement, consensus and agreement cannot be reached. The Holy See, as it has done in these last 6 decades of presence at the UN, continues to support the work of the organization, making its voice heard in defense of the poor, of those in vulnerable situations, supporting every peace process and initiative. Thank you, Mr. President.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Secretary of State of the Holy See. I now give the floor to His Excellency Wang Yi, Special Representative of President Xi Jinping, member of the Political Bureau of the CPC Central Committee, and Minister for Foreign Affairs of China.
Mr. President, colleagues, today, humanity has once again come to a historical crossroads. We are facing a changing and turbulent world. Challenges of insecurity, imbalanced development, and ineffective governance are increasingly prominent. Hotspot conflicts, major country confrontation, and geopolitical tensions keep emerging. The future of this planet is becoming a cause for growing concern. Meanwhile, we are also embracing a world full of hope. Multipolarity and globalization have become the unstoppable trend of our times. The aspirations of the Global South nations for modernization has never been stronger. Our stride toward modernization has never been more steadfast. This institution, the United Nations, embodies the aspirations of people across the world for lasting peace and common prosperity, and bears witness to the glorious journey of the international community coming together in pursuit of progress. President Xi Jinping stressed on multiple occasions that the role of the UN should be strengthened, not weakened. Amid global transformation not seen in a century, what China calls for is to follow the trend of the times, keep to the direction of human progress, and make the right choices of history. What China proposes is to uphold peaceful coexistence and put in place a security architecture that ensures enduring stability, uphold openness and inclusiveness, and foster a development paradigm that promotes shared prosperity, uphold harmony without uniformity, and adopt an approach to civilizations that promotes exchange and mutual learning, and adopt fairness and justice and develop a governance structure that pulls strengths for shared benefit. In today's world, the security of all countries is tied together. In face of various kinds of global challenges and risks, no one can stay immune or enjoy security alone. Countries need to be guided by a vision of common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security. We should respect each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity, take the legitimate security concerns of others seriously, and resolve disputes and differences through dialogue and consultation. We should actively explore a path for major countries to coexist in peace and work for a new type of international relations characterized by mutual respect, fairness, justice, and win-win cooperation. In today's world, the development of all countries is deeply integrated. If the rich get richer while the poor remain poor, then everyone is born equal would become an empty slogan, and fairness and justice would be even more elusive. Achieving modernization is a legitimate right of the people of all countries, not a prerogative of a few. We should be committed to advancing global modernization and ensure that no one and no country is left behind on the journey toward modernization. We should advocate a universally beneficial and inclusive economic globalization, unequivocally oppose unilateralism and protectionism, and help developing countries leap over the development divide to maintain the vitality of global economic growth. In today's world, each civilization has its own strengths. President Xi Jinping pointed out that there is no such thing as a superior or inferior civilization, and civilizations are different only in identity and location. We should respect the diversity of civilizations and strive to replace estrangement and clash of civilizations with exchanges and mutual learning. We should advocate humanity's common values, namely peace, development, equity, justice, democracy, and freedom. Refrain from conducting values-oriented diplomacy and oppose ideology-based confrontation. We should respect each other as equals and help each other succeed with an inclusive mind. In today's world, countries should all enjoy sovereign equality. As a large number of global South nations are growing with a strong momentum, gone are the days when one or two major powers call the shots on everything. We should advocate an equal and orderly multipolar world and see that all countries, regardless of their size, have their own place and role in the multipolar system. We should practice true multilateralism, oppose hegemonism and power politics, and make international relations more democratic. We should follow the principle of extensive consultation and joint contribution for shared benefits and make global governance more just and equitable. Mr. President, peace is the most precious thing in our world today. You may wonder if there is a path leading to peace. In fact, peace is the path. Without peace, development will not sustain. Without peace, cooperation cannot happen. For the sake of peace, a single ray of hope is reason enough not to give up. The slightest chance deserves 100-fold effort. An end to the Ukraine crisis remains elusive. The top priority is to commit to no expansion of the battlefield, no escalation of fighting, and no provocation by any party, and push for de-escalation of the situation as soon as possible. China is committed to playing a constructive role, engaging in shuttle mediation and promoting talks for peace, not throwing oil on the fire or exploiting the situation for selfish gains. At this session of the General Assembly, China, Brazil, and other countries in the Global South have jointly launched the Group of Friends for Peace. Its very purpose is to uphold the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, build consensus for a political settlement of the crisis, and contribute to a prospect of peace. The question of Palestine is the biggest wound to human conscience. As we speak, the conflict in Gaza is still going on, causing more casualties with each passing day. Fighting has started in Lebanon again, but might cannot replace justice. Palestine's long-held aspiration to establish an independent state should not be shunned anymore, and the historical injustice suffered by the Palestinian people should not be ignored anymore. There must not be any delay in reaching a comprehensive ceasefire, and the fundamental way out lies in the two-state solution. China has always been a staunch supporter of the just cause of the Palestinian people to regain their legitimate national rights and a staunch supporter of Palestine's full UN membership. We have recently helped to bring about breakthroughs in intra-Palestine reconciliation and will continue to work in concert with like-minded countries for a comprehensive and just settlement of the question of Palestine and durable peace and stability in the Middle East. The issue of Afghanistan concerns regional peace and security. It is important to help the country exercise prudent governance, fight terrorism effectively, improve people's life, and reinvigorate the economy to create a better life or future for the people of Afghanistan. The Korean Peninsula should not experience war again. The important thing is to make persistent efforts for de-escalation, commit to seeking solutions through dialogue and consultation, realize a transition from the armistice to a peace mechanism, and safeguard peace and stability on the peninsula. China is deeply aware that Asia needs stability and development and opposes division and conflict. As an important origin of human civilization and a key engine of global growth, Asia has the wisdom and capability to stabilize the situations through regional cooperation and handle differences properly through dialogue and consultation. We are firmly against the meddling by countries outside the region, and will firmly resist attempts by any force to stoke trouble and confrontation in the region. Mr. President, as the world faces increasingly serious challenges, China has never opted to be an indifferent spectator. Instead, we've been playing a bigger part in global governance than ever before. President Xi Jinping has put forth the Global Development Initiative, the Global Security Initiative, and the Global Civilization Initiative in recent years. They carry China's wisdom for resolving various difficult issues confronting humanity and bring impetus from China for improving global governance. In the face of uneven and inadequate global development, China's proposal is to put development at the top of the global agenda, focus on delivering the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN 2030 Agenda, increase input in development, and help developing countries better respond to different risks and challenges. At the recent Beijing summit of the FOCAC on China-Africa cooperation, President Xi Jinping outlined 10 partnership actions to be taken together with Africa to advance modernization, and announced the decision to give over 40 LDCs, including those in Africa, zero tariff treatment for 100% tariff lines. China is the first major developing country and the first major economy to take such a significant step. In the face of unilateral bullying acts such as sanctions and blockade, China firmly supports countries in defending their legitimate rights, upholding the equity and openness of the international system, making global development more coordinated and beneficial for all, and jointly opposing technology blockade and rejecting decoupling or severing supply chains. Sanctions and pressure will not bring monopolistic advantages. Suppressing and containing others will not solve problems at home. The right of people of all countries to pursue a better life should not be taken away. Here, we once again urge the United States to completely lift its blockade, sanctions, and terrorism-related designation against Cuba. In the face of aggravating ecological challenges, China is firmly committed to a path of green, low-carbon, and sustainable development. We will move from carbon peaking to carbon neutrality in the shortest time span in world history, contributing China's efforts to harmonious coexistence between humanity and nature. At the global level, the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities must be upheld, and the Paris Agreement must be implemented in earnest. Developed countries should assist developing countries in developing their capacity to cope with climate change. Touting the need of climate response while suppressing the green industries of others will only hold back global progress toward green transition. In the face of burgeoning artificial intelligence, China is committed to taking a people-centered approach, developing AI for good, and putting equal emphasis on development and security. We are working to explore and establish widely recognized international rules and standards. China supports the UN's role as the main channel for global AI governance and is committed to strengthening international cooperation on AI capacity building. China has put forth the AI Capacity Building Action Plan for Good and for All, and we are ready to make more contribution to the sound, orderly, fair, and inclusive development of AI. In the face of the task of human rights protection, China maintains that all countries' right to independently choose their path of human rights development should be respected. No country should impose its own will on others or interfere in others' internal affairs in the name of human rights. In human rights protection, China is committed to putting people first and promoting the free and well-rounded development of the people. We have found a path of human rights development that suits China's national conditions. China is ready to engage in equal-footed dialogue and exchanges with all countries and UN human rights bodies and jointly promote the sound development of the global human rights cause. Mr. President, Taiwan is an inalienable part of China's territory. This is the history and the reality. Both the Cairo Declaration and the Potsdam Proclamation stated in explicit terms that all the territories Japan had stolen from the Chinese, such as Taiwan and the Penghu Islands, shall be restored to China. And this constitutes an important part of the post-war international order. Right here in this august hall 53 years ago, the 26th session of the UN General Assembly adopted Resolution 2758 with an overwhelming majority, deciding to restore all the rights of the People's Republic of China at the UN, to recognize the representatives of the government of the People's Republic of China as the only legitimate representatives of China to the UN, and to expel the representatives of the Taiwan region from the UN and all the organizations related to it. Once and for all, the resolution resolved the issue of the representation of the whole of China, including Taiwan, in the UN. It made clear that there is no such thing as two Chinas, or one China, one Taiwan. On this matter of principle, there is no gray zone or room for ambiguity. The complete reunification of China will be achieved. Taiwan will eventually return to the embrace of the motherland. This is the overwhelming trend of history that no one and no force can stop. Mr. President, in a few days' time, the People's Republic of China will celebrate the 75th anniversary of its founding. Over the past 75 years, no matter how the world changes, China's dedication has not changed. It is dedicated to pursuing happiness for the Chinese people and the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. It is also dedicated to human progress and world harmony. In the course of seeking its own development, China has kept in mind the common interests of the whole world, generating new opportunities for the world through its own development. Not long ago, the third plenum of the 20th CPC Central Committee made an important decision on further deepening reform comprehensively to advance Chinese modernization. It will set in motion a new journey where China joins hands with the world in common development and progress. Chinese modernization will contribute robustly to world peace. The Chinese culture values peace, and the Chinese nation has no tradition of external expansion. China, once a victim of foreign power bullying, knows full well the value of peace and the hard-won gains of development. In fact, China is the only major country that has written peaceful development into its constitution, and the only country among the 5 nuclear weapon states to pledge no first use of nuclear weapons. We're actively exploring and putting into practice the Chinese way of addressing hotspot issues, boosting the prospects for resolving the security dilemma and improving security governance, and paving the ground for conflict settlement and peace building. Every step in China's development is an increase in the force for peace. Chinese modernization will contribute robustly to common development for all. China does not only care about its own development, we are ready to develop hand-in-hand with all countries. By further expanding high-standard opening up, China is aligning proactively with high-standard international economic and trade rules to foster a market-oriented, law-based, and world-class business environment. China has realized full mutual visa exemption with many countries and is expanding its unilateral visa waiver program to facilitate two-way personnel flows. China is vigorously promoting high-quality Belt and Road cooperation, a concrete step to support the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. China will also speed up the implementation of the 8 measures in support of Global South cooperation and the series of initiatives supporting Africa's peace and development, in order to help countries in the Global South stride toward modernization. Chinese modernization will contribute robustly to improving global governance. China has been an abiding supporter of the UN's continued reform and development to bring about a modernized UN 2.0. The international financial system needs to be more fit for the times, and global governance should be more balanced and effective. China will continue to fulfill its international obligations, provide financial support, and send our best minds to the United Nations. The UN system needs to respond to the legitimate calls of developing countries and increase the representation and voice of those in the Global South. Chinese modernization will contribute robustly to the advancement of human civilization. Chinese modernization is rooted in China, but has also drawn on the achievements of other civilizations. It has created a new form of human advancement and provided a new choice to other countries in exploring modernization paths. China advocates that different civilizations respect and learn from each other to jointly advance the cause of human civilization. China has proposed the setting up of an international day for dialogue among civilizations. We call for more people-to-people exchanges and cooperation across the world to promote understanding and amity among people around the world. Mr. President, next year will mark the 80th anniversary of the victory of the World Anti-Fascist War and the founding of this very organization. China stands ready to work with all countries to renew the founding purposes and mission of the UN, reaffirm our steadfast commitment to the UN Charter, advocate and practice true multilateralism, build a community with a shared future for mankind, and jointly usher in a better world. Thank you.
I thank the Special Representative of President Xi Jinping, member of the Political Bureau of the CPC Central Committee, and Minister for Foreign Affairs of China. I now give the floor to His Excellency Murat Netlu, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Kazakhstan.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me first congratulate His Excellency Philemon Yang on his election as the President of the current session. I assure him of my country's full support and wish him every success in his noble endeavors. Excellencies, as we gather here, global system is dangerously close to a breaking point. Dozens of our fellow member states represented in this August hall are gripped by conflict and instability, claiming many thousands of lives. Entire continents are affected by the climate crisis. Multilateralism is struggling to keep pace, and yet the United Nations is still the indispensable universal organization. After almost 8 decades, it remains a vital platform for dialogue and cooperation on the most acute issues of our time. This undeniable fact compels states to keep working through the UN towards a sustainable world. It reinforces our determination to seek global peace and stability. And this green podium, this hall, remind us that no nation, no matter how powerful, can tackle global problems alone. Excellencies, the plight of millions of conflict victims worldwide across the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and parts of Africa deserve immediate, decisive, and collective action. But the UN Security Council's decision-making process is paralyzed, as underscored by the Secretary General. This sad reality undermines the credibility, legitimacy, and effectiveness of the organization as a whole. Having annual discussions about reforming global institutions is no longer enough. It is time to enact the change our world so desperately needs. Last year, from this podium, President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev of Kazakhstan introduced the initiative of World Unity for Just Peace and Harmony. This visionary framework seeks to cultivate peace, stability, and security through meaningful and equitable engagement between the global South and global North. The voice of middle powers and developing nations are vital in bridging divides, and nurturing a more effective international security architecture. It is in this spirit that I invite all nations to embrace my country's initiative. Together, we can pave the way for a more harmonious and united world. Excellencies, the pressing risk of another nuclear arms race is exacerbating geopolitical polarization. For over 4 decades, Kazakhstan's people and land were subject to the devastating effects of 456 nuclear tests. Nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation are key pillars of my country's foreign policy. Kazakhstan is therefore deeply concerned by the escalating rhetoric of nuclear threats. We appeal to all nuclear states to adhere to the Non-Proliferation Treaty and Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. I also urge those countries who have not joined the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons to do so as soon as possible for the safety, stability, and survival of our world. As the chair of the 3rd meeting of the TPNW, we will promote establishment of an international trust fund for assistance to victims of nuclear tests. Excellencies, another existential threat to no nation can afford to ignore is climate change. This year is expected to be the hottest on record. Droughts, floods, and other weather calamities continue to cost lives and damage economies around the globe. We therefore call again on G20 countries and multilateral development banks to share the burden by providing green technologies and concessional financing to low and middle-income countries in line with the Paris Agreement. Our region stands on the front line of global warming, despite accounting for only 1% of global emissions. Central Asia will face an above-average 2.5-degree increase in temperatures by 2050. This sober reality has deepened our commitment to addressing climate change. That is why my country will host the Regional Climate Summit in 2026, aimed at further enhancing cooperation among UN members on climate resilience and green transition. One of the consequences of climate change is water scarcity across the world. It undermines food, energy, ecological systems on every continent. 1 in 4 people today lacks access to safe drinking water. And if this trend continues, by 2050, more than 5 billion could suffer water shortages. In Central Asia, by that time, water deficiency will affect 25 to 30% of the population. Meeting this challenge requires both serious political will and resources, including scientific and economic ones. As the current chair of the International Fund for Saving the Aral Sea, Kazakhstan is working with regional partners on a long-term and sustainable cooperation mechanism for the effective use of water and energy resources in Central Asia. Our approach takes into account the interests of all stakeholders in irrigation, hydropower, and environmental protection. Excellencies, the largest landlocked country, Kazakhstan, actively promotes the interests of all LLDC countries in addressing the multifaceted challenges our group faces. Despite significant strides, we are still far from implementing the Vienna Programme of Action. We are lagging on critical indicators, particularly the adoption of innovative technologies for trade facilitation and the development of transit and transport corridors. These challenges magnify the vulnerability of LLDCs, choke off investments, diminish trade, and escalate the debt burden. Furthermore, our geographical constraints prevent us from integrating fully into global trade and economic processes on an equal footing. We are dedicated to advancing our group's vital interests globally and regionally. My country is already a bridge for 80% of overland transit cargo traffic between Asia and Europe. Kazakhstan is committed to strengthening synergies between the Belt and Road project, the Global Gateway Initiative, and the North-South and Trans-Caspian International Transport Road corridors. Together, we have the unique potential to transform our landlocked status into land-linked connectivity. Excellencies, the Summit of the Future distinctly highlighted digital transformation as the dividing force behind the 2030 agenda. But the true key to this shift is ensuring every nation has equitable access to cutting-edge technologies. The rapid development of AI exacerbates cyber threats and brings new challenges. This includes its potential use in warfare, the consequences for data privacy, the risks of misuse for information wars, deepfakes, and more. Kazakhstan believes the UN can and must play a leading role in this revolutionary field. We urge technologically and digital advanced states to take an active part in developing common ethics and standards to govern AI in the most responsible and peaceful way. The establishment of a UN AI office would be a welcome step in this direction. Excellencies, in the current geopolitical landscape, Central Asia is increasingly asserting itself in global affairs. Our region is not only a crossroad of cultures and economies, but it is also rapidly transforming into a bridge for cooperation between East and West. We adhere to the formula successful Central Asia, successful Kazakhstan. Along with our partners, we are building a more connected and resilient Central Asia through a set of C5+ dialogue platforms. Today, our regional agenda also includes the development of Afghanistan into a stable and predictable state, a reliable trade partner. In this context, the United Nations Regional Center on Sustainable Development for Central Asia and Afghanistan in Almaty will be a game changer for coordinated SDG delivery. We do hope this innovative undertaking will receive broad support from member states. Excellencies, upholding human rights is not merely an aspiration, but one of the key prerequisites of sustainable development. It's also the best antidote against those inequalities that are often the root cause of instability and conflicts. Our national reforms aim to build a just and fair Kazakhstan based on inclusivity, transparency, and the rule of law. My country has abolished the death penalty, instituted a zero-tolerance policy against torture, and strengthened national preventive mechanisms. To reinforce our commitment to the values of life and humanity, Kazakhstan, along with our Central Asian neighbors and Mongolia, is spearheading the initiative to become the first region entirely free of the death penalty. Safeguarding women's rights and ensuring children's safety are top priorities of my president and government. We are advancing the UN Human Rights Council agenda by proposing impactful resolutions focused on child education and combating domestic violence. Being one of the champions of repatriation of women and children from conflict zones in the Middle East, Kazakhstan will host an international conference in 2025 on best practices in the field of repatriation and reintegration. Through partnership with the UN volunteers, we are creating new opportunities for young people and actively promoting 2026 as the International Year of Volunteers for Sustainable Development. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, both at home and on the global stage, Kazakhstan and its people stand resolute in our commitment to build a peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable future. Central to this mission is our unwavering dedication to the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, embodying our shared aspiration for humanity. As we look ahead to the 80th anniversary of the United Nations next year, I urge all states to unite in the full implementing this ambitious agenda. We have the chance to transform this upcoming historical milestone into a true celebration of shared achievements. Let the Summit of the Future and the UN General Assembly session mark the beginning of a transformative journey towards a brighter and more inclusive future for all of us, our children, and coming generations. Thank you.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Kazakhstan. I now give the floor to His Excellency Chenda Sovia Sok, Prime Minister of Cambodia. Deputy Prime Minister of Cambodia.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. Your chosen theme, leaving no one behind, acting together for the advancement of peace, sustainable development, and human dignity for present and future generations, mirrors the prevailing aspiration of the international community despite intractable security threats and challenges, as well as uncertainty and continuously evolving geopolitical landscape. The current picture of the world is grim. Violent armed conflict in Ukraine, Gaza, Lebanon, Sudan, Myanmar, and many other parts of the world rage on despite efforts to de-escalate them. Worse, with intensifying geopolitical tensions, any misstep in various flashpoints may trigger a regional or even global war, potentially involving nuclear weapons. Military spending has surged across the world, draining resources that could be used to address multiplying non-traditional threats that no single country can effectively tackle alone, such as climate change, pandemics, food insecurity, technological disruption, transnational crime, and backsliding on SDGs. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, Cambodia cannot emphasize enough the urgency for all of us to act together to confront these daunting challenges. It is critical that the principle of the UN Charter and international law remain the backbone of the world order and global cooperation. The use of diplomacy and mediation must be prioritized to resolve conflict and prevent de-escalation. Cambodia believes that sustainable peace can be achieved only through meaningful dialogue based on mutual respect, genuine goodwill, tolerance, and a commitment to peaceful coexistence. Based on these core principles, Cambodia sees great merit in the new agenda for peace presented by the UN Secretary General and support the actions laid out in the Pact for the Future for promoting international peace and security. Also based on these principles, Cambodia hopes for a prompt end to the war between Russia and Ukraine through diplomacy and dialogue based on equal respect. We commend all efforts to de-escalate the fighting and all initiatives that seek to end the war through peaceful means and that engage all sides to work together towards a lasting peace. On the Palestine-Israel conflict, Cambodia remained committed to its long-held support for a two-state solution in accordance with the relevant UN resolutions. We believe this plan is the only way Palestinian and Israeli can heal their prolonged antagonism and live side by side peacefully. Cambodia supports the establishment of the State of Palestine and Palestine's bid to become a full member of the United Nations. Cambodia condemns all acts of terrorism and calls for dialogue to stop the ongoing war and the ever-worsening humanitarian crisis in Gaza. We are deeply concerned over the prospect of an all-out region-wide war in the Middle East with the latest report on intensifying fighting in Lebanon. The current rapid escalation of war in this region must stop. Members of the international community must insist on all sides to work proactively to seek ways to defuse the very grave situation now. The crisis in Myanmar remains a serious concern to us. Cambodia, along with other ASEAN member states, is committed to the ASEAN 5-point consensus as the basis for peaceful and inclusive solutions. We stress the importance of fostering an environment conducive to dialogue and to ceasefire negotiations. We also emphasize the need for humanitarian relief and for Myanmar-owned and Myanmar-led political process aimed at a lasting peace and reconciliation. ASEAN, on the strength of its diversity, should continue to lead the effort to help Myanmar restore normalcy and the Laos chairmanship. On the other hand, Cambodia welcomes the appointment of UN Secretary General on Myanmar and look forward to her working closely with the ASEAN Chair, own Special Envoy on Myanmar. A final point. Cambodia opposes unilateral coercive measures. They have a detrimental impact on ordinary citizens in targeted nations. Sanctions and economic blockades disproportionately harm the most vulnerable and impede achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, let me touch now on leaving no one behind. Given Cambodia's own dark past, we believe that peace is the key prerequisite for development, especially development that is sustainable and inclusive. Cambodia sees the attainment of sustainable development and human dignity for every individual as an absolute necessity. Cambodia's current long-term development strategy, called the Pentagonal Strategy, aims to build Cambodia into a vibrant and just society that thrives on lasting peace, political stability, good governance, and respect for the rule of law. With economic growth projected to reach 6% in 2024, Cambodia is on track to further reduce poverty to below 10% by 2028. It is also on track again to gain upper middle income status by 2030 and high income status by 2050. How do we get there? First, Cambodia will give top priority to building its human capital to meet the demand of the digital age. We will invest more on, first, quality education, science, and technology. Second, training and technical skill. Third, health and well-being. And fourth, food security and equal social protection with special attention to women, girls, and the marginalized. Second, we will deepen economic diversification by developing key sectors such as transportation and energy, and we will promote new drivers for economic growth and job creation. The construction of the Funan Techo Canal, inaugurated last month, will connect our capital Phnom Penh to the Gulf of Thailand. It will be a game changer for sustainable growth in Cambodia and for improving the livelihood of our people. Third, to enhance efficiency inclusion, and access to public services, Cambodia will accelerate the development of e-government and of a digital economy and society. I am happy to note our significant advancement in financial inclusion with the introduction of an interoperable digital payment system by the central bank using blockchain technology called Bakong. Fourth, we take a whole of society approach to development that seeks to enhance resilience, sustainability, and inclusion by promoting gender equality, a green and circular economy, and environmental protection. After years on the list of the least developed countries, Cambodia looks forward to its expected graduation by LDC status by 2029. Reaching these milestones will reflect our impressive progress on our journey of revival and development. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, Cambodia values multilateralism, the rule-based international order, the principle enshrined in the UN Charter and international law. These are indispensable for consensus building and mobilizing concerted actions. And we worry that confidence in the fairness and effectiveness of multilateralism is eroding. Conflicts are multiplying. Geopolitical competition is intensifying. Adherence to international regimes is declining on many fronts: arms control, trade, the environment, human rights. In this time, it is time that member states reaffirm their commitment to the global system and rebuild trust in it. The United Nations, with its unparalleled convening power, has long been the driving force in addressing global challenges and promoting cooperation among states. But unprecedented challenges today are testing the limit of this esteemed body. We urgently need to revitalize the UN and make it more robust and more proactive. Cambodia fully supports the Secretary General's reform agenda, including the intergovernmental negotiations on Security Council reform. The UN Security Council needs to be tailored to the 21st century, and to be effective for today's task, its composition must be more fairly representative. As the Secretary General has rightly stated, we can create a future fit for our grandchildren with systems built for our grandparents. Cambodia also fully supports the Secretary General call for bold climate actions. To achieve net zero emission by 2050, as it has pledged it would do, Cambodia has launched many measures, including raising the current 62% renewable energy share to at least 70% by 2030, by promoting reforestation and by providing incentive to green investment projects. Cambodia is actively participate in global climate negotiation, and it's look forward to the upcoming COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan. Cambodia also fully supports the work of the high-level political forum on SDGs held in July and the ECOSOC. We welcome the adoption of the Ministerial Declaration on SDGs. We reaffirm our commitment to the 2030 Agenda. We endorse an effort to bridge the SDG financial gap, reform the global financial system, and strengthen multilateral governance. As all of us together look to the future, it should seem evident that no nation can achieve these ambitious goals alone. Global challenges demand global solutions. Cambodia is committed to strengthening international cooperation, sharing knowledge and best practices, and working collaboratively with our global partners. By acting together, all of us here can create a world where peace, sustainable development, and human dignity are a reality for all our peoples. Cambodia commends the success of the Summit of the Future and reaffirm our steadfast commitment to the letter and the spirit of the Pact for the Future, to international peace and security, to turbocharging SDGs, to modernizing multilateral institutions. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, Cambodia is proud to play a significant role in global peacekeeping. Since 2006, we have sent over 9,000 of our people to serve in 11 UN missions, including over 800 women. We are honored to present our candidacy for membership in the Organizational Committee for the Peacebuilding Commission for 2025-2026. We seek your support for our bids. Cambodia supports relevant adjustment and reform to increase the effectiveness of peacekeeping operations and promote the agenda for women, peace and security, and youth, peace and security. Cambodia is also honored to hosting the 5th Review Conference of the Mine Ban Convention, also known as the Ottawa Convention, in November in Siem Reap. This landmark event will serve as a platform for renewed global solidarity in the pursuit of a world free from the scourge of anti-personal mine. We extend a warm invitation to all member states to join us for this important gathering. To conclude, Cambodia reaffirmed its steadfast commitment to working hand in hand with the UN and all member states to advance the noble goals of peace, sustainable development, and human dignity. Cambodia stands ready to contribute our unique experience, resources, and unwavering determination to this endeavor. For Cambodia, sustainable and inclusive development means no one and no place is left behind. I thank you for your kind attention.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister of Cambodia. I now give the floor to His Excellency Xavier Bettel, Deputy Prime Minister, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, Minister for Development Cooperation and Humanitarian Affairs of Luxembourg.
Colleagues, it's an honor to be in front of you again, for being able to speak about the situation and how we see the world. I listened to a lot of speeches, and when I listened to the main theme of the topic we had last week and the beginning of the week, no one behind, I have to tell you that we are in a special situation. How should you explain to someone in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Kiev, in so many different places around the world, that we want to leave no one behind? That just because of war. How would you explain to some of the countries now that after some national elections, the development and the aid for those more poor countries are cut by saying no one behind? How do you want to say to people waiting outside, demonstrating outside, that we came here together to find solutions about all the troubles that we have nowadays? I can tell you that for them, we are just discussing, but not acting. We are like a very barking dog without teeth, barking all the time, but leaving so many people behind. That's just a not so optimistic introduction, but this is the case how it is today, when I see that for the moment 60 conflicts are existing and about 50 conflicts could start tomorrow. So in total we have about 115 conflicts potentially or existing already. And they go from Congo to Yemen, from Sudan to Myanmar, from Syria to Venezuela, from Haiti to Libya, from Armenia to Azerbaijan could happen tomorrow. So you see, the whole world is, in fact, if you look geographically, in conflict. You have these big conflicts we speak a lot about, but you have also all these little conflicts who are not on our agenda every day, but where people suffer that much also. I have next week a meeting of the French-speaking countries, and as I want to be welcomed, excuse me that I will continue also in French.
When I speak of the major conflicts that exist, let me begin with Ukraine. This week we had President Zelensky here, and a lot of you have been to Kyiv. You've been there to support Ukrainian colleagues. And I remember the discussions that we've had here, and I see a couple of colleagues from the Russian Federation here. That's good. It's something new. Very often they leave the room. I'd like to ask them today why there is this war. Why this war? I remember at the beginning of this conflict, a lot of you felt that this wasn't my role, but I tried to dialogue with President Putin and also have a dialogue with President Zelensky. And I remember the arguments that were put forward. I won't tell you details of my discussion with President Putin, but asking why Russia has attacked Ukraine. And it was, we were told that it was Ukraine that wanted to make Russia fearful, that it was a danger to Russia. Beginning a war is easy. Ending a war is what requires greatness, and you can have peace conferences. They are organized, but without the presence of Russia or China, believe me, these are moments of moral support for Ukraine. But if we want to find a solution, then you have to get everybody around the table to find a lasting solution for Ukraine. We ourselves are Luxembourg, and we're a small country, but twice we have experienced aggression. Twice we thought we had neighbors that thought they knew better for our country than we did ourselves. And so we understand the suffering of Ukraine. We know what it is to have a bigger neighbor, and a neighbor that feels they know better. And today in the European Union, Germany is a brotherly country, a partner country with France and Belgium. And we are lucky to have the European Union of 1957. And when we see conflicts in this world, you see that the European Union, and we're not always the best example in everything, but you can see that we live in peace. And that goes from Baltic countries down to Portugal, from Greece to Ireland. And you can see that it works when you sit around a table and discuss things, or at the time when we had conflicts, you see that it was force that was the response. So let's get around the table with our partners, but let's have peace talks where we also have the Russian partners and the Russian partners participating, so that we can work out a plan for the future. Luxembourg does what it can. We have supported demining, for example. And don't forget, I just visited Laos. 30 years after the war, 40 years after the war, people are still dying from remnants of war. And don't forget that if tomorrow the war in Ukraine comes to an end, there will still be victims tomorrow and the day after and the day after that, as human consequences of having placed mines everywhere. We have to also help children that have been deported to Russia, and we need to ensure that impunity is not the rule. And after conflict, of course, I have to, referring to Ukraine, I have to refer to the Middle East. This week we've had discussions with partners to find a two-state solution. For me, what is important today is that we have to be conscious of the fact that there won't be a winner of this war. What's been caused here? How do you explain to a young Israeli that Palestine is a friendly country when their brothers or sisters are held hostage by Hamas? How do you want to explain to a young Palestinian that Israel, its neighboring country, is its friend when they buried their friend the day before? That's the reality on the ground. What are we doing here? It's generations of hate for the next 20, 30 years, future generations, where people won't get around the table. This is one is going to continue to hate the other in this situation. Are we aware of this? Yesterday I heard the Israeli Prime Minister he was thinking about the head of Hezbollah. I mean, if tomorrow somebody said if the head of Hezbollah is killed, there'll be no terrorism, that's the same. But these terrorist organizations are like octopuses. If you cut off one arm, another one grows. There's no one approach against fanaticism. We have to restore the hope of young people. And if we don't find a solution quickly, we are training future generations for Hamas and Hezbollah in that region that is so full of conflict. 40,000 people already dead. UNRWA, which is an organization that is part of this house, let's remember that. And that is being placed on the list of terrorist organizations. Are we all going to accept that our own agency working there be considered as a terrorist organization? And for those that are not familiar with UNRWA's work, I counsel you to go to Palestine and see what UNRWA is doing on the ground, providing education, health. If there wouldn't be that if UNRWA wasn't there. They're doing everything to ensure that they can do what they can. So many people have already given their lives for UNRWA to help the Palestinian people. And if we accept here that UNRWA is considered a criminal organization, we open the Pandora's box for everything. We have to understand today that there's no alternative to UNRWA. And no one is saying, well, I can replace UNRWA. I can deal with Palestine tomorrow, whatever happens. So I really do urgently call upon Israel to stop placing an agency of this house on a terrorist list, and we are not reacting to it. That means we're accomplices in accepting everything. Now, I understand that Israel has the right to self-defense, but there are limits as well, and it's important to be balanced. On this matter, people always want to say you're for Israel or you're for Palestine or you're against one or against the other. No, you can be for peace. You can be for the civilian population without being in favor of one or not in favor of the other. We think too much about this one party against another party, and it's the civilians that suffer. We talk about recognition as well. My country is one of the few countries that has not recognized. Some countries have recognized. Okay, but that recognition is a one-time thing. I don't want to have recognition just as a symbol. I want it to have an impact. So that's also a message to all of you that haven't yet do this. Let's coordinate, have an exchange of views and see how we can have an impact on the ground so that that has an effect. Not just to say, well, we're giving moral support and that is we want to help the people that are there on the ground. And there will need to be a two-state solution. We need a two-state solution, and we need to realize that peace in Palestine will constitute the security of Israel. And without peace in Palestine, there will never be any guaranteed peace for Israel. They go hand in hand. And I'd like to have this coordination between countries, and if there is no coordination, then we need to think about possibly opening up a diplomatic representation in Israel and in Palestine that we haven't yet done as the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg, to stress that we want to have two states that we recognize. And when I think of the vote that was held here a little while ago, do you agree with the interpretation of the ICJ? We asked for an opinion, let's not forget that. And then, do we decide afterwards whether we want to respect that opinion? You don't wait for a judge to give a ruling and then say whether you agree with it or not. No, you request an opinion of a judge, and then you request the opinion of that international organization, or it may as well not be there in the first place. So the Sahel, another difficult area where some years ago we were discussing with partners. Now we've seen coups and instability in Africa. People who are becoming refugees because they're afraid that they might be mistreated by the coup leaders that took power overnight. What's important for me, I'm a foreign affairs minister, but I'm also a minister for cooperation. And we've spoken about the Pact for the Future. We've spoken about this investment. And I remember as former Prime Minister, the Millennium Goals, the MDGs. Now we have the Sustainable Development Goals, and particularly this year is the 75th anniversary of the Geneva Conventions, and we speak about these things, but we forget as well. As new Minister for Cooperation, I have established new criteria. I, for example, have asked countries with which we've signed an agreement that I don't want to dictate things. For a long time, Europe thought it knew what was best for Africans. No, Africans have to make their own choices, but it's important to support them as well through cooperation policies. And then you can have partnerships, you can have exchanges and collaborations. What I ask of those countries, however, is not the minerals, it's not about the economic recovery, and I'm not asking them to change their legislation. All I'm asking is that they don't backslide, that they don't go backwards. So, in other words, the rights that exist for everybody already are respected, be that the rights of women. When I think of a country that's a member here where women don't have the right anymore to be educated, do we accept that? No, and I won't shut up about that. I don't accept it. Where religions can't be followed in a country, no, I don't accept that. And when we ask that the rights of minorities and gender minorities are respected as it exists today and there be no backsliding, I will say something if that's not the case. This week I was at a meeting with a head of state, African head of state, and I wanted to work with them, and I spoke about these three conditions. This the importance of respecting them. And that head of state told me with regard to sexual minorities that if their population feel that homosexuality is a crime, then they will criminalize it. To be a head of state, Mr. President, is not always to do what the majority wants. It's also to defend the minorities in a country. You can't always follow what some people want against others, to be done against others. In a country of diversity is what makes the wealth of a country. And if tomorrow rights that exist now are withdrawn, that means that I can't have a serene dialogue with that country if they go in that direction. And I regret that very much. And I'm not asking anybody to change their rules on abortion or religion, or to have marriage for everyone, or give rights today that don't exist. But don't backtrack. These are things that we've seen in Europe and elsewhere in the world. So don't make that mistake of going back to a previous world. And the Pact for the Future. And we've got SDG 16, rule of law and justice. I'd like to thank I'm grateful for the discussion that we've had here talking about the rule of law. Now, in the EU even, we have certain countries that see this with rather flexibly. I don't think that's acceptable, and we have had to take action within the European Union against certain countries. But we do have to keep our backbone here when it comes to women's rights and justice. Women's rights, for example, in Luxembourg, we've discussed whether we should give additional money to political parties that place more women on electoral lists. But why give a premium for something that should be normal? We have decided that if somebody doesn't do this, there will be less money. But why should we give more money for doing something that should be normal? No. You can make progress, logical progress, rather than giving a premium to an organization to do something that should be normal. The environment, when I look at the SDGs, we speak about the environment. Well, that seems to be a little bit forgotten. And I mean, we had a lot of demonstrations, Fridays for Future and others, and then the economy seemed to take the upper hand on the environment. And don't forget that some countries might disappear with the environment. I mean, we're surrounded by other big land masses, so we won't, but some islands might risk disappearing. Are we aware that if we don't, it might not be a popular view, but if we don't act, then we will be leaving heritage to future generations that we won't be proud of. There's a COP coming up in Baku, and I think that will be a very important point in time for all of us. And today we have a conflict between them and Armenia, and I hope it will be solved before that COP. Let's do that. Let's commit ourselves to peace in Azerbaijan. Let's show that we can be proud to come to Baku, that we can be proud to have results where everyone will be happy to have gone without having in the back of their minds, is there a risk that tomorrow there might be a conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia. So let's deal with that. That's really all I can recommend. Then with regard to this dog that barks but never dies, yes, in Europe we have rules like we do in the UN that date back to the Second World War, the leftovers of the Second World War, with the 5 permanent members and Africa not represented. And in 2024, now we're asking ourselves, well, how can we have a Security Council talking about the world without Africa being represented? That's the first thing. And now we're being told, well, it would be good to have this and that country as a permanent member. I'm not opposed to that. But it's not by enlarging the circle of the privilege that we will become more efficient. If we want to be more effective, we have to ask ourselves the question whether it's normal that a permanent member, through a veto, is able to block a process. No, it's not. I think you have to think about this. Security Council reform, why couldn't it be that if a country enters a veto, a 2/3 majority would be able to overturn that veto, and that then there would be a vote in the General Assembly, and if 2/3 here as well voted in a different direction to the veto, then that veto would be rendered ineffective. If we want to make progress, that's the only thing we can do. Just having more members in the Security Council would just be expanding the problem, because more people would have the right to veto. So I conclude here, Mr. President, by saying that being a permanent member of this House is not a privilege, it's a responsibility. And if you look at the time that this was created, it was done by countries that were there to guarantee power. They were the major powers that were there because they were the guarantors of peace. Whereas today, some of them are more troublemakers than anything else, and they prevent us finding peaceful solutions, but which are in everyone's interest. My dream, Mr. President, is to come here one day and address you, being convinced that we can say that in this world, and I said this 3 or 4 years ago in my speech, that in this world, irrespective of where we are and the colour that we might have, the religion that we might follow, our gender, our sexual orientation, how much money my parents had, I have the same chances, the same rights, but also the same obligations. And then I would be proud to be part of an international community. I thank you.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, Minister for Development Cooperation and Humanitarian Affairs of Luxembourg. I now give the floor to His Excellency Abdoulaye Maïga, Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of State, Minister of Territorial Administration and Decentralization of Mali.
Monsieur le Président de l'Assemblée.
Distinguished President of the General Assembly, distinguished heads of state and government, Secretary General of the United Nations, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, I'd like to convey the warm greetings of His Excellency Colonel Assimi Goïta, President of the Transition, Head of State of Mali, and those of the government and people of Mali. Mr. President, I'd like to also warmly congratulate you on behalf of the Malian delegation on your brilliant election to the presidency of the 79th session of the General Assembly. Your beautiful country, Cameroon, an African country that is our brother and friend, enjoys excellent relations with my country. You can count on the full support of Mali as you fulfill your mandate successfully. Here I also congratulate your predecessor, Ambassador Dennis Francis of Trinidad and Tobago, for his outstanding leadership of the work of the 78th session of the General Assembly. And lastly, allow me to reiterate to the Secretary General of the UN, Mr. Antonio Guterres, our encouragement to continue his efforts to achieve the noble goals of our common organization. Mr. President, on June 26, 1945, by signing the UN Charter in San Francisco, the peoples of the world pledged resolutely, I quote, to protect future generations from the scourge of war, which twice in one human lifetime inflicted unthinkable suffering upon humanity, end quote. Today, we have the opportunity to discuss the following theme: leaving no one behind, acting together to promote peace, sustainable development, and human dignity for present and future generations. The choice of this theme, 79 years after the signing of the UN Charter, is it a simple coincidence or the outcome of a certain mindset? We don't know. However, we must note, unfortunately, that the question of preserving generations is still a keenly relevant one. Not only future generations, but also our own generation. Is this a failure of the UN? It is certain that an objective assessment with realistic recommendations regarding our collective system would be key for our future. Mr. President, Mali commends the relevance of this theme, which is one of pressing importance. It is true that tensions and wars currently underway continue to jeopardize international peace and security, development, and the fundamental rights of populations. This comment comes from a country that since 2012 has been experiencing a multifaceted and complex crisis that has led to the loss of more than half its territory and caused many innocent victims through an incestuous and opportunistic association of terrorist groups and armed groups. Mr. President, the drama in Mali dates back to the allegiance between the Salafist group for call and combat of Al-Qaeda to the GSPC, Algerian GSPC on September 11, 2006, exacerbated by the intervention of NATO in Libya in 2011, a reckless intervention. The destabilization of this country, this brotherly country, has exacerbated insecurity in our country through terrorism, all kinds of trafficking, laundering of capital, and community conflicts manipulated by terrorists and their foreign state sponsors, as well as the violent actions of certain individuals. For their part, the Malian authorities, having noted and witnessed the failure of international forces present on their territory since 2013, decided to take their fate back into their own hands. And since June 7, 2021, after the swearing-in of His Excellency Colonel Assimi Goïta, President of the Transition and Head of State, a vast campaign was launched to equip and reorganize the defense and security forces associated with a Malian transformation project. The National Refoundation Conference was launched in December 2021. It allowed Malians to engage in an exhaustive diagnosis of the causes of the crisis, followed by the adoption of 517 relevant recommendations. In this vein, and after having experienced insecurity caused by the circumstances, we took stock of what was happening in Mali, and it was frightening. Mali was battered, humiliated, looted and pillaged, abandoned, left high and dry, stabbed in the back. I could go on with these expressions to describe the suffering experienced by the people and the Malian defense and security forces. Based on this experience, knowing that the danger to Mali resulted from these circumstances, His Excellency Colonel Assimi Goïta, President of the Transition and Head of State of Mali, laid forth a realistic vision of the geopolitical situation, using a popular Bambara proverb, which I here loosely translate: "The delectable sauce on one man's table comes from the theft of another man's cattle," end quote. Thomas Hobbes, describing the state of nature in a similar manner, stated that man is the wolf of man. Thanks to this proverb, these proverbs about gastronomic and hunting references, the head of state described the ruthless reality of international relations, and especially the role of Africa, the looting of the raw commodities of which serve the development of others and not Africans, for the most part. In addition to this vision, the head of state instructed or called on Malians, as part of the refoundation, to become themselves again. The head of state, on April 23, 2024, launched the National Program for Education on Values, which aims at a return to our origins, without which it would be difficult to imagine a bright future for our country in its legitimate quest for sovereignty. This call to become ourselves again has to do with the question of who we are. The immediate response to this question was provided by the slogan of Mali: one people, a great family and cosmopolitan nation, one goal to amplify diversity in unity, united for a common good, one faith, the faith that God has given us as a resource to bring about prosperity. To better define what it means to be Malian, Professor Ibrahim Ndiaye, expert within the Committee on the Implementation of the National Program for Education on Values, stated that Malians are characterized on one hand by 5 cardinal values: humanity, empathy, the obligation to transmit human values to future generations, the sense of honor, accepting differences and otherness on the social, human, and cultural fronts. And on the other hand, 5 inviolable principles that have to do with the country itself. That is, an indivisible, inalienable Mali, a Mali that's not for sale, a Mali that's no one's property, an imperishable Mali. Mr. President, by being themselves, Malians have forged a third path. They are not becoming predators, lawless barbarians that seek to rustle other people's cattle, but also not to become eternally powerless victims of predation. The middle path promoted by Mali consists of carrying out our own development, taking a more virtuous path, ensuring the respect of our sovereignty while respecting those of others, that of others, rejecting outside control, and refusing to interfere in others' internal affairs, remaining open to all partnerships based on a win-win relationship. It's also important to note that these principles and values characterize Mutatis Mutandis, the brotherly peoples of Burkina Faso and Niger. With regard to the Malian political transition, we must recall that following the National Refoundation Conference, the Malian people chose to conduct political reforms before holding elections in order to firmly establish virtuous governance. The implementation of the recommendations of the conference allowed us to achieve tangible results, especially the establishment of the Independent Authority of Elections Management, the adoption of a new constitution on July 22, 2023, following a well-organized referendum, the completion of our territorial and administrative reorganization, strengthening our fight against corruption, and bolstering transparency in public action, and the revision of our mining code to make it more equitable and to favor local regulations. Mr. President, to further foster national unity, which is the basis of all development, the head of state announced on December 31st, 2023, the holding of the Inter-Malian Dialogue for Peace and Reconciliation to, quote, eliminate the root causes of community and intercommunity conflict with the ultimate goal of reconciling these communities. Based on a participatory and inclusive approach, the Inter-Malian Dialogue took place in 3 stages on the communal, regional, and national levels, allowing Malians, both within the country and abroad, to engage in transparent exchanges to find Malian solutions for prevention, management, and resolution of conflicts. Unlike the agreement on peace and reconciliation that resulted from the Algiers process, which certain parties, signatories to which have actually turned toward terrorism, which has become a pretext for certain states to interfere in our internal affairs, the Inter-Malian Dialogue allowed Malians to air the dirty laundry within their families without external interference. After the demise of the Algiers Accord on January 25, 2024, today the Inter-Malian Dialogue and its recommendations, officially submitted to the head of state on May 13, 2024, remain the only reference frame for internal conflict resolution. We once again call on all Malians to join this trend toward reconciliation, a key stage toward returning to constitutional order, which would be secure and stable thanks to the holding of presidential elections. When it comes to combating insecurity, since the Malian Defense and Security Forces began launching offensive actions autonomously, they've achieved many successes with regard to combating terrorism. All regions have now been recovered from the hands of terrorist groups, especially the region of Kidal on November 14, 2023, after a memorable military operation. Today, terrorist groups have been severely weakened. The Malian Defense and Security Forces have been deployed throughout the national territory. In addition, our forces' offensives are continuing to dismantle the remaining terrorist networks. The government of Mali remains aware that a purely security-based response is limited in its effectiveness. That's why, in addition to military action, the government of Mali has a comprehensive integrated strategy with the goal of restoring the authority of the state throughout the national territory. It includes political, administrative measures, as well as measures for economic and social development, including dialogue with armed groups and the provision of basic social services to our brave population. Despite these concrete and positive results, these criminal groups continue to have a certain capacity to cause trouble through their desperate attempts to undermine our territorial integrity, and they are terrorizing our populations. And here, from this podium, I must denounce the support for these groups from foreign state sponsors. Foreign state sponsors. After years of denouncing these state sponsors that are supporting international terrorism, Ukrainian authorities flagrantly violated in an unprecedented way the UN Charter, as well as the relevant UN conventions and resolutions regarding the prevention of terrorism, when the officials of this country, having confused the international arena for a theater stage, acknowledged their participation in the cowardly terrorist attack against a patrol of the Defense and Security Forces on July 24th to 26th, 2024 in Tinzaouaten in the region of Kidal. Mr. President, in light of the complex situation in the Sahel, motivated solely by their desire to take their country's fate into their own hands, Their Excellencies, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, President of FASO, Head of State of Burkina, Colonel Assimi Goïta, President of the Transition, Head of State of Mali, and Brigadier General Abdourahmane Tiani, President of the National Council for the Salvation of the Homeland, Head of State of Niger, launched the Alliance of the States of the Sahel, which is a collective defense and mutual assistance architecture to combat terrorism, by signing the Liptako-Gourma Charter on September 16, 2023. 10 months later, exactly 10 months later, on July 6, 2024, the founding fathers of the AES, the Alliance of States of the Sahel, sovereignly decided to transform this mechanism into a confederation based on 3 pillars: diplomacy, defense, and development, with the ultimate goal of bringing about a federation. Very quickly, important results were achieved in the fight against terrorism thanks to our pooling of our resources for defense, as well as joint military operations, and thanks to our tireless commitment to eradicating terrorism. That is why the member states of the Confederation of States of the Sahel, on August 19, 2024, sent a joint letter to the Security Council of the United Nations to condemn the support of the Ukrainian authorities for international terrorism, to denounce aggression against Mali, and to demand that the Security Council take appropriate measures against the Ukrainian government. Here, I would also like to recall that this letter was sent at a time when Mali was still waiting for the outcome of a previous letter sent to the Security Council from August 15, 2022, which exposed the acts of aggression committed by France against Mali, as well as France's involvement in the promotion of 3 forms of terrorism in the Sahel: armed terrorism, economic terrorism, and media terrorism. With a surface area of 2.758 million square kilometers, with 71 million inhabitants, mostly young people, with an outstanding economic potential, as well as mineral resources covering almost all of the elements of the periodic table, the Confederation of the States of the Sahel, based on the state of the heads of state, peoples, and defense and security forces, are well aware of their own dignity and their honor. and they're more motivated than ever by the blood of their own treacherously spilled. They are resolved to combat terrorism in all of its forms and to honor the memory of victims, civilians and soldiers, Sahelians and foreigners. They are determined to defend their territorial integrity and to ensure their prosperity in a peaceful manner, as laid out in the preamble of the Liptakaguma Charter, which refers to various international organizations, including ECOWAS, and to universal values. As for the lords of war and chaos, with the assistance of God, we will triumph again and always over your sinister and diabolical schemes. Strangely, since the creation of the AES, we've been surprised by the fierce hostility it has encountered, especially from certain officials of ECOWAS who are acting on the orders of imperialist and neocolonial entities. The rest of history is well known. Amadou Hampâté Bâ said, I quote, "If you try too hard to get rid of a pesky frog, it will end up settling in your own pond," end quote. The Confederation of States of the Sahel is open to all investors as long as the partnership benefits the populations of the Sahel and as long as it respects the sovereignty of states. Mr. President, here I would like to commend relations of cooperation which are exemplary and productive between Mali and Russia, China, Turkey, Iran, and many other of our true allies. Mali remains open to all partners that wish to help it address its many challenges. In this regard, I reaffirm that the government of Mali remains willing to pursue and bolster its cooperation with the UN, especially through its agencies, funds, and programs with which we enjoy excellent cooperation relations. Here as well, we would like to commend and recognize the wisdom of His Excellency, the President Abdelmajid Tebboune, President of the Republic, the Democratic People's Republic of Algeria. On August 29, 2024, during a visit to the south of Algeria, you had said that Libya, Niger, and Mali were brotherly nations which you supported and would never harm. The Malian people were not surprised by these remarks, which eloquently demonstrated your Pan-Africanism, like that of your celebrated predecessors, including late President Abdel Aziz Bouteflika, affectuously nicknamed Abdelkader Mali. After his establishment in Gao and the commitment made by Malian authorities through the following actions: offering Malian territory as a rear base for the Mujahideen, thus opening up a southern front, taking part in armed battles against the French colonizers, deploying Malian combatants alongside Mujahideen on the Algerian territory to defend the freedom and dignity of Algerians, defending the Algerian cause and all diplomatic institutions until they recovered their independence. However, it is our duty to call to your noble attention the incongruous remarks made by two of your colleagues, which go against your wish to promote harmonious relations with your neighbors, including Mali. On July 31st, 2024, the Algerian Minister of Foreign Affairs declared that the Malian crisis did not need a military solution. He said this is a conflict between brothers. The solution must be political. With regard to the Algiers Accord, he stated that it was beneficial to Mali and had protected the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Mali. Deviating from this accord, therefore, would have a negative impact on all of its achievements, he said. In addition, on August 26, 2024, your permanent representative to the UN declared, I quote, "This morning I learned from media reports that a drone carried out a strike in the north of Mali, killing about 20 civilians. Those who were operating this drone can be held accountable to no one." End quote. If you look at those first remarks, you can see major interference in the internal affairs of Mali. The nature of the solution used by the Malian authorities concerns only the Malians themselves. Since the demise of the Algiers Agreement on January 25, 2024, Malians have only one wish regarding its fate, that it rest in peace. Distinguished Minister of Foreign Affairs, the accord is dead and gone, and you will not be able to resurrect it. Here I would like to reiterate that no one loves Mali more than Malians. I also remind you that Mali and its people are not just spectators in the face of attacks and adversity. For every bullet fired against us, we will reciprocate. For every word employed against us, we will reciprocate. Don't say we didn't warn you. As for the Algerian PR, in addition to providing room and board, I'm sure associated with delicious dishes like shakshuka and shorba for fugitive terrorists and renegades, his role as go-between is in no way assisting the promotion of neighborly relations. In his remarks, he makes serious, baseless accusations, on one hand implying that the victims were civilians, which is defamatory and irresponsible, and on the other hand, he stated that the operators of the drones were not accountable to anyone. This helps to fuel a disinformation campaign against Mali while supporting the idea that the valiant Malian defense and security forces would be incapable of themselves operating drones. Here, I would like to remind you that the rise and the improvement of the Malian armed forces is a tangible reality that has helped us to regain control of all of our national territory. As for the use of drones, the operators were indeed Malians who acted with professionalism like the rest of the defense and security forces. And they were targeting terrorists in accordance with international norms. I remind you that several years ago, those who promoted the instrumentalization of human rights were determined to tarnish the counterterrorism performance of the National Algerian Army, highlighted the subversive question of who is killing whom. And today, we are very disturbed that the Algerian PR himself is the one weaponizing human rights against the Malian army. Mali calls for these two mad diplomats to stop meddling in history. Clearly, they have no idea about the history between the brotherly people of Algeria and of Mali, and the contributions of Mali to the war of liberation in Algeria. They also are ignorant of geography because they wrongly consider Mali to be a wilaya, that is, an Algerian province. Mr. President, Mali, I repeat, calls on these two wayward diplomats to cease to interfere in this history. They clearly know nothing about the history between Mali and Algeria, and they wrongly consider Mali to be a wilaya, that is, an Algerian province. I'll repeat once more, Mali calls on these two wayward diplomats to cease to interfere in the history they don't understand. They clearly are ignorant about the history between the peoples of Mali and Nigeria, the extraordinary contribution of Mali to the war of liberation in Algeria, and they are also ignorant of geography because they wrongly consider Mali to be a wilaya or an Algerian province. Mr. President, with regard to the regional international situation, Mali continues to closely follow developments in Africa and the rest of the world. We are deeply concerned by the violence in the Middle East, especially the occupied Palestinian territory. The Malian people reaffirm the support for the brotherly Palestinian people in their legitimate battle for self-determination. The government of Mali reaffirms its support for the two-state solution, for Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace and security within secure, internationally recognized borders. We condemn without reserve the indiscriminate use of force by the Israeli army against the Palestinians. On the humanitarian front, Mali is concerned by the situation, the dire plight of millions of refugees and IDPs throughout the world due to armed conflict, natural disasters, and climate change. Here I'm thinking in particular of my countrymen who are refugees in neighboring countries that I thank for their hospitality and generosity. I assure them that the government of Mali will spare no effort to continue to assist them and to pave the way for a dignified return of these refugees, a safe and dignified return to their homes. There are many challenges to international peace and security, and these call for a reform of the UN architecture. In the same vein, Mali continues to advocate a reform of global political, economic, and financial governance to create optimal and just conditions for the development of our countries. In light of this, Mali continues to call for a reform of international financial institutions such as the World Bank and the IMF. Similarly, We welcome alternative and credible models such as BRICS. Climate change constitutes a real threat for current and future generations. We must have the courage to leave behind dogmatism and narrow self-serving interests with regard to this issue. The time has come to effectively implement the decisions of our summits and of our COPs. The countries that caused climate change must shoulder their full responsibility, including by supporting the efforts of countries of the South to engage in eco-friendly development. Mr. President, in closing, I would like to observe that this 79th session of the General Assembly is taking place in a context marked by massive challenges for our states and for our multilateral institutions. International peace and security have never been in such danger since the two world wars, including in danger from international terrorism and violent extremism. In this context, it is difficult to attain the SDGs by 2030 when it comes to education, healthcare, access to drinking water, energy, and justice. However, despite these obstacles, Mali remains ready to fully play its role in the implementation of its national and international commitments while continuing to hope in the future. May God bless Mali and preserve Malians from obscurantist and destructive forces throughout the world. May God bless the Confederation of States of the Sahel and protect the populations of the Sahel from obscurantist destructive forces throughout the world. May God bless Africa and protect Africans from obscurantist and destructive forces throughout the world. May God bless the world and protect all of humanity from obscurantist and destructive forces in the world. Thank you for your very kind attention.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of State, Minister of Territorial Administration and Decentralization of Mali. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Retno Lestari Priansari Marsudi, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Indonesia.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Mr. President, this is my last opportunity as the Foreign Minister of Indonesia to represent my country to speak before the UNGA. A decade of so many challenges, but at the same time, a decade of Indonesia's many contributions in addressing global issues. One of them is Palestine. Indonesia cannot, I repeat, cannot sit back and relax, seeing the injustice that continues to be committed against the people of Palestine. Indonesia is and will always stand with the people of Palestine to attain their right to have an independent state of Palestine. As I speak now, more than 41,000 people in Gaza have been killed. Situation in West Bank, Lebanon are deteriorating. Is that not enough? Is that not enough? Will the Security Council only take action to stop Israel atrocities when all Palestinians are displaced? Or when 100,000 Palestinians are killed? Or when a regional armed conflict breaks out? That will be too late. PM Netanyahu yesterday mentioned, and I quote, that Israel seeks peace, that Israel yearns for peace. Really? How are we supposed to believe that statement? Yesterday, while he was here, Israel conducted unprecedented massive air attack on Beirut. PM Netanyahu wants the war to continue. We must stop that. I repeat, we must stop that. We must pressure Israel to come back to a political solution for two-state solution. Mr. President, the overwhelming majority of the UN members strongly support the two-state solution, and this is the right time to walk the talk. Recognizing the state of Palestine is the least that we can do now to give Palestinians equal footing on the world stage and to exert pressure to Israel to stop their atrocities. Therefore, I urge countries that have yet to recognize the state of Palestine to do so now. If each of us does it, for sure it will give impact. The recognition of Palestine today is an investment that will yield a more peaceful, just, and human world tomorrow. Once again, Indonesia urged the permanent members of the Security Council to concretely act to immediately stop Israel from blatantly violating international law and to end Israel impunity. The mandate of the Security Council is to maintain peace, to create peace, not to maintain and prolong wars, or even worse, to support the perpetrator of atrocities. Inaction means complicity. Colleagues, wherever Indonesia goes, we carry the voices of the global South. Indonesia started this commitment in 1955 when Indonesia hosted the Asia-Africa Conference in Bandung, Indonesia. The Bandung spirit of equality, cooperation, and solidarity will always be alive to inspire the global South to gain their rights, including their rights to development. That is the spirit that we need if we want to have a global leadership where moral virtues are the compass of our business. Do not bury the principle of the UN Charter and international law under the rubble of double standard, trust deficit, and zero-sum game. Mr. President, Excellencies, against these global challenges, Indonesia continues to be part of the solution. By embodying this commitment, Indonesia presidency in 2022 managed to prevent the G20 from collapsing, despite deep geopolitical division. During the global pandemic, we led the establishment of the Pandemic Fund and co-chaired the COVAX AMC Engagement Group to ensure equitable access to vaccine and financial resources, and to safeguard health security for all, especially for the global South. As a member of the Human Rights Council, Indonesia continuously calls for inclusive partnership in addressing global human rights issues. And amidst regional rivalries, Indonesia pioneered the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific as a framework for concrete and inclusive cooperation. To embrace, not to contain. We have demonstrated that global leadership will never be attained through force, domination, and fear. Global leadership should be about guiding collective action by listening, empowering the collaboration, and instilling hope. This is what I say, leadership without hegemony. Mr. President, Excellencies, to attain this vision, we must focus on three key priorities. First, advancing peace through inclusive leadership. Multilateral system should be reformed. The UNSC must be an inclusive space for peace, where a wider range of voices can be heard, and timely decisions can be taken for our collective good. Without peace, our effort to attain global goals such as the SDGs will remain a dream without reality. Indonesia is committed to contribute to global peace by being one of the largest troops contributing countries in UN peacekeeping mission and remain firm in our proactive role to counter terrorism. We also strive to ensure that peace we are promoting will be inclusive by advancing the Women, Peace and Security agenda, contributing to women empowerment, including pursuing equal access to education to women and girls in Afghanistan. Investing in women is investing in peace. Empowering women is empowering prosperity for all. Second, ensure a resilient future for shared prosperity. Indonesia believes in a future where all nations thrive no matter how big or small. But the global pandemic and impact of climate change has shown us all that to prosper together, we must work together. Therefore, the implementation of the Pact for the Future is important to accelerate the achievement of the SDGs and scale up partnership and sustainable development even beyond 2030. At the same time, geopolitical tensions have also significantly impacted global supply chain, affected the development trajectory of the global south, many of whom remain unable to freely exercise their right to development. In this context, Indonesia has taken proactive steps. Earlier this month, Indonesia held the second Indonesia-Africa Forum to enhance cooperation in international supply chains and connectivity and build collaboration in preparing for the future challenges. Indonesia also hosted the 10th World Water Forum, I repeat, the 10th World Water Forum this year. We believe that water is a crucial element for shared prosperity. And third, building bridges to foster global collaboration. Colleagues, a winner takes all, and take it or leave it mentality should no longer exist when collaboration is the only antidote in addressing the global challenges of today. For Indonesia, a world where the only option is us versus them will only result in the word of us or them. Global solidarity and collective responsibility is the essence of the Bandung spirit, and this spirit guided us through our G20 presidency in 2022, chairmanship of ASEAN in 2023, and continuous effort to voice the aspiration of the global South. Indonesia envisions a world where nations collaborate together to address shared challenges, uphold international law, and protect human rights and dignity of all people. In Southeast Asia, ASEAN with 650 million people has proven that diversity can coexist with stability, peace, and prosperity. Indonesia also continues to work with ASEAN to restore peace and stability in Myanmar through implementation of the ASEAN 5-point of consensus and to enable the safe and dignified return of the Rohingya people. Beyond ASEAN, we also continue to deepen our engagement to the Pacific region to become part and parcel of an inclusive and peaceful Indo-Pacific architecture based on the principle of solidarity, equality, and mutual respect. Mr. President, colleagues, peace, justice, and humanity will always be at the core of Indonesia's foreign policy. Indonesia understands that the global leadership is not something that inherited, nor does it fall from the sky. It must be earned through our collective efforts. Rest assured that Indonesia's commitment toward common peace, common prosperity, common security will be carried out forward across Indonesia's successive administration. It is in this spirit that I'm proud to announce Indonesia's candidature for a non-permanent seat of the United Nations Security Council for 2029-2030. This candidature reflects our deep commitment to contributing toward global peace and security. So, colleagues, let us work together to build a legacy of peace for our future generation. I thank you very, very much.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Indonesia. I now give the floor to His Excellency Sergei Lavrov, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation.
Distinguished Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, a few days ago, within this building, the forum entitled The Summit of the Future took place. Russia showed understanding to the Secretary-General's idea to convene that summit, since the crisis of our organization is growing worse and something needs to be done about that. And we were involved honestly in the preparations for the summit, although quite frankly we didn't have any particular illusions about it. In the contemporary history of the UN, there have been many ambitious events that concluded with loud declarations that were quickly forgotten about. For example, in 2000, the Millennium Summit declared the task of freeing peoples from the scourge of war. Just 2 years after that, the USA, at the head of the Coalition of the Willing, under the laughable pretext, without a mandate from the UN Security Council, invaded Iraq, a country which has still not been able to recover from the destructive consequences of that escapade. In 2005, the UN World Summit declared a commitment to establishing a just peace in accordance with the principles and purposes of the UN Charter. This sacred obligation certainly didn't stop the USA and their allies from getting the then leader of Georgia, Mikhail Saakashvili, in 2008 to unleash an armed aggression against the people of South Ossetia and Russian peacekeepers. And a further 3 years after that, NATO organized the military intervention in Libya, destroying its statehood and undermining the stability of neighboring countries. In 2015, the UN Summit on Sustainable Development adopted grandiose plans to combat poverty and inequality, but they turned out to be empty promises in light of the reluctance of the countries of the West to refrain from their neo-colonial practices of mining the wealth of the entire world for their benefit. Just look at the statistics of the promises that were kept in terms of financing the development of the countries of the Global South and the transfer of environmentally friendly technologies. Just like Kofi Annan and Ban Ki-moon in the past, the current Secretary-General advanced his own initiative under the slogan of rebooting global cooperation. It's an excellent slogan. Who could be opposed to that? But what global cooperation can we really talk about at a time when the West has trampled all of these unshakable values of globalization that they've been telling us about for so many years from this rostrum, trying to convince us that they would ensure equal access for everyone to the goods of contemporary civilization? Where is the inviolability of property, the presumption of innocence, freedom of speech, access to information, fair competition on markets with understandable and unchanging rules? The Secretary-General is talking about global cooperation at the same time as the countries of the West have unleashed a veritable sanctions war against a good half, if not the majority, of states in the world. And the dollar, which was advertised to us as the heritage and good of all of humanity, has been grossly transformed into a weapon. For more than 60 years, there has been a trade blockade of Cuba, the cancellation of which the overwhelming majority of members of the international community are calling for. In the pursuit of the ever more ephemeral aim of preserving their domination, Washington is blocking the normal work of the World Trade Organization on dispute settlement and reform of the Bretton Woods institutions, the structures of which for a long time now have not reflected the real balance of forces in the global economy and finances. The West also wants to transform the UN into a tool for advancing its mercantile plans. As was shown by the Summit of the Future, there are more and more attempts to erode the intergovernmental nature of the organization. Long necessary changes in the staffing of the Secretariat are being held back. Key posts in the Secretariat are now essentially occupied and handed down to representatives of the Western minority. If the Secretary-General is calling for a reboot of global cooperation, then the Secretariat must advance unifying ideas and propose compromise options rather than coming up with excuses to introduce into the UN's work narratives that are beneficial to the West. Breathing new life into the UN, it's not too late to do that. But in order to do that, we can't have unrealistic summits and declarations. Rather, it must be done through rebuilding confidence and trust on the basis of the Charter principle of the sovereign equality of all member states. However, as long as confidence is being undermined, for the time being it is, and the actions of the West to create in circumvention of the UN narrow formats that are subordinate to it to resolve subsidiary fateful issues such as internet governance and artificial intelligence. But those problems affect the future of all of humanity, and they must be considered on a universal basis without discrimination or trying to achieve unilateral advantage. That is to say that there must be an honest negotiation involving all members of the UN, rather than the way that the so-called Pact of the Future was prepared for, without a single plenary round of negotiations that all countries would be involved in. But instead of that, the work was carried out under the control of Western manipulators. As a result, the pact, even before it was born, had already joined the pantheon of declarations that sound nice in English. Sad as it is, that is the fate of products of these World Summits. However, things aren't any better when it comes to implementing Security Council resolutions, which are binding. The sabotage of decisions on the Kosovo settlement and the Dayton agreements on Bosnia and Herzegovina says a great deal. But the most glaring example continues to be spinning out over almost 80 years the consensus resolutions on the creation of an independent Palestinian state coexisting in peace and security with Israel. There can be no justification for acts of terrorism, which Israelis fell victim to on the 7th of October last year. But everyone who still has a sense of compassion is outraged by the fact that the October tragedy is being used for the mass collective punishment of the Palestinians in the form of an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe. The killing of Palestinian civilians with American weapons must immediately be ended. It is important to ensure the delivery of humanitarian aid to the enclave, the reconstruction of infrastructure, and most importantly, it is important to guarantee the realization of the legitimate right of the Palestinians to self-determination and to allow them, not in words, but in deeds, as they say, on the ground, to create a contiguous and viable state within the 1967 borders with its capital in East Jerusalem. Another glaring example of terrorist methods as a means of achieving political aims is the inhumane attack on Lebanon that transformed civilian technology into a lethal weapon. There must be an immediate investigation into this crime, but already we cannot remain silent in the face of the many publications in the media, including in Europe and here in the United States, that indicate to varying degrees the involvement and at the very least awareness of Washington when it comes to the preparation of that terrorist attack. And we understand that the Americans always deny everything, and they do everything they can to hush up any facts that come to light, as they did in response to the irrefutable evidence of their implication in the terrorist attack on the Nord Stream gas pipeline. Those gas pipelines, incidentally, were a marvelous symbol of that selfsame global cooperation that our Secretary General dreams of. But as a result of their destruction, the competitiveness of the European Union in the global economy has been undermined for long years to the benefit of the United States. It is on the West's conscience as well that the truth about those who organized many other heinous crimes has been put on a back burner, including the bloody provocation in the Kiev suburb of Bucha and the series of poisonings of citizens of Russia in Britain and Germany. The UN Secretariat cannot remain separate from efforts to establish the truth in situations that directly impact global security, and in doing so is obliged to strictly observe Article 100 of the UN Charter, to act impartially and to avoid the temptation to play into the hands of individual states, particularly those that are actively calling not for cooperation, but to divide the world into the flowering garden and the jungle, or to those sitting around the table of democracy and those that are on the menu. We mustn't forget also about the service record of those that demand that their rules be implemented by the rest of the world. The invasion of Afghanistan and the inglorious 20-year presence there of the infamous coalition was accompanied by the formation of Al-Qaeda. A direct result of the aggression against Iraq was the creation of ISIL. Unleashing the war in Syria gave rise to Jabhat al-Nusra, which is now Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and the destruction of Libya opened the floodgates for the permeation of terrorism into the Sahara-Sahel region and for the flow of millions of illegal migrants to Europe. We call upon all of those that are thinking about the future of their peoples and countries to be very wary of any new escapades by those who invented these rules. We are particularly concerned by the now almost commonplace practice of political killings, as once again took place yesterday in Beirut. The tragic and unacceptable turn of events in the Arab-Israeli conflict in Yemen, in the Red Sea Basin, in the Gulf of Aden, Sudan, and other hotspots in Africa reflects an indisputable fact. Security can either be equal and indivisible for all, or it won't be for anyone. An understanding of what would seem to be a simple truth in the context of European security is something that Russia for years has been trying to impart to Washington, London, and Brussels, who are obsessed with their complexes of their own exceptionalism and impunity. Although they initially promised not to expand NATO, and in 1999 and in 2010 they signed in official documents of OSCE summits an obligation to not ensure their security at the expense of others. In fact, the North Atlantic Alliance for 3 decades has been carrying out the geopolitical and military expansion of NATO into Europe. It is trying to take root in the South Caucasus and Central Asia, creating direct threats to the security of our country. And now the same is happening in the Asia-Pacific region, where NATO infrastructure is creeping in, and to contain or deter China and Russia, narrow military political blocs are being created that undermine the inclusive security architecture under the ASEAN umbrella. And the West is not only not remembering about the global cooperation that our Secretary General is such a fan of, but openly in their doctrine documents, they are harshly accusing Russia, China, Belarus, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and Iran of creating threats to their domination. In respect of Russia, they have declared the aim of dealing it a strategic defeat, almost just like London and Washington planned in May 1945, with the development, even before the end of the Second World War, of an operation entitled Operation Unthinkable to destroy the USSR. Back then, this was kept top secret, but the current Anglo-Saxon strategists are not hiding their ideas. For now, they do, it's true, hope to defeat Russia using the illegitimate neo-Nazi Kiev regime, but they're already preparing Europe for it to also throw itself into this suicidal escapade. I'm not going to talk here about the senselessness and the danger of the very idea of trying to fight to victory with a nuclear power, which is what Russia is. Equally senseless are the Western backers of Kiev swearing that there is no alternative to negotiations based on the infamous peace formula. They are defending this doomed ultimatum by shamelessly invoking the UN Charter, demanding the territorial integrity of Ukraine be ensured. And I would like to recall, in particular, I'd like to remind the colleagues in the Secretariat that the Charter isn't just about territorial integrity. Charter 1 of the Charter declares the obligation to respect the principles of the equality and self-determination of peoples, and that served as the international legal basis for the process of decolonization, which incidentally still needs to be completed, however much the French, the British, and other former colonial countries may resist. In 1970, the General Assembly unanimously decided in its declaration that everyone must observe the territorial integrity of those states whose governments respect the right of peoples to self-determination, and on that basis provide the entire population living on that territory. And I underscore that this was a unanimous decision of the UN General Assembly following long years of difficult discussions. There's no need to prove that Ukrainian neo-Nazis, having seized power in Kiev as a result of the US and Allies-supported bloody coup d'etat in February 2014, didn't and are not still representing the Russian population of Crimea, Donbass, and Novorossiya. The Western leaders, doing anything they can to talk about human rights, are in a very telling way staying silent about these rights when it comes to the racist actions of their clients in Kiev. In the light of this forgetfulness, I'll remind you about another requirement, again in Article 1 of the UN Charter, the requirement to respect the rights and fundamental freedoms of any person regardless of race, sex, language, and religion. The rights of Russians and those that feel that they are part of Russian culture following the coup d'etat in Kiev have methodically been exterminated. The Russian language in Ukraine is banned by law in all areas, in education, the media, art, culture, and even in day-to-day life. Recently, another law was adopted banning the canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church. These are gross violations of the rights of Russians enshrined in the UN Charter, and they bring with them threats to the security of Russia and all of Europe, stemming from the Kiev regime and those that are dragging it into NATO. And all of these are the root causes of the current Ukrainian crisis. It is to address these that is the aim of the special military operation that Russia is carrying out to defend its security and the current, present and future of the people on their native lands. We value the sincere aim of a number of our partners to advance, out of the best interests, mediation initiatives. We value their constructive results focus, unlike the hopeless Zelensky peace formula. We call upon our friends in their further efforts to take into account in full the facts that I have mentioned about the real reasons of this situation, the real causes of this situation. Unless they are addressed, a just UN Charter-based peace will not be possible. A realistic settlement plan was outlined by President Putin on the 14th of June, when once again, convincingly, he demonstrated Russia's goodwill when it comes to achieving negotiated agreements, the prospect for which were thrown out by Kiev and its backers as a result of the coup d'etat in 2014. The disruption of the Minsk agreements in 2015 and the Istanbul agreements of 2022. The unprecedented level of arrogance and aggressiveness of Western politicians against Russia simply not only nullifies the Secretary General's idea of global cooperation, but it is increasingly also blocking the functioning of the entire system of global governance, including the Security Council. That's not something we chose, and we're not responsible for the consequences of this dangerous course. However, if the West doesn't stop, there will be serious costs that will be felt by everyone. It is clear to the global majority that confrontation and hegemony will not resolve any global problem. They will only artificially hold back the objective process of the formation of a multipolar world order that will be based on the equal rights of large and small nations, that will respect the values of human identity, the equality of men and women, and the rights of peoples to determine their own fate. And incidentally, all of these are also quotes from the UN Charter, just like the principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of sovereign states as well. A confirmation of which, to the shame of the members of our organization, was blocked by the US and their satellites at that very same summit of the future when the pact was adopted. Speaking on the 18th of September before the participants in the 4th Eurasian Women's Forum in St. Petersburg, President Putin underscored the need for a pooling of efforts in the name of sustainable development and general universal, equal, and indivisible security. Addressing the most complex problems facing all of humanity is something we can only do together, taking into account one another's interests. The West must realize this and refrain from its neo-colonial ideas. The Global South and the East are more loudly speaking about their rights and their fully fledged participation in decision-making processes on the whole range of the international agenda, which is becoming particularly relevant in a situation in which the West is steadily destroying the model of globalization that they themselves created created. The role of interstate associations in Asia, Africa, and Latin America is growing stronger, including the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the African Union, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean Countries, the League of Arab States, the Eurasian Economic Union, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and others. The contacts between those regional integration structures are being established among themselves and also with the global association, the BRICS, which is creating opportunities for harmonizing approaches and agreeing on mechanisms for mutually beneficial cooperation and development that are not under the control of any negative external influence or diktats. All of these objective processes need to be taken into account in the work of the G20 as well, where the G7 is no longer able to pick the tune. We need to take a new look at ways of ensuring security in various regions, learning lessons from the sad experience of the functioning of the NATO-centric models, or the models, the so-called model of Euro-Atlantic security that the West has used to serve their own expansionist ideas. Russia advanced the initiative of forming an inclusive architecture of equal and indivisible security in Eurasia, which, and I wish to underscore this, is open for all states and organizations on our shared continent. We stand ready to work together to find mutually acceptable solutions, the use of interlinkages and the natural competitive advantages of a single Eurasian space. This will be the subject of an international conference in Minsk that begins on the 31st of October this year. We are not stepping away from dialogue with the West. In July, upon the proposal of Russia, there was an open debate in the Security Council on the subject of building a more just, more sustainable world order. We believe it is important to begin the discussion that has begun in the UN as well as in other platforms. With a fairer world order undoubtedly requires the expansion of the representation of the Global South in the UN Security Council. We support our position in favor of the candidacies of Brazil and India, while at the same time taking a positive decision on the well-known initiatives of the African Union. However, of course, we cannot even talk about any additional seats for Western countries who are already excessively overrepresented within the Security Council. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, May next year we will mark the 80th anniversary of the victory in the Second World War, during which the genocidal policy of the Third Reich killed tens of millions of people, including 27 million citizens of all of the peoples of the Soviet Union. These crimes do not have a statute of limitations, nor is any moral justification for those who are trying to whitewash Nazi executioners, collaborators, and their current adherents, be it in Ukraine, the Baltics, Canada, or in any other countries. Today, the world is facing extremely serious challenges that require a joining of forces rather than confrontation and a thirst for global domination. Russia will always stand on the side of collective work, on the side of truth and law, peace and cooperation, in the interests of giving rebirth to those ideals that were enshrined by the Founding Fathers. That is the aim of the Group of Friends in Defense of the UN Charter that was created upon the initiative of Venezuela. Its purposes and principles remain fully relevant. The most important thing is to make sure that absolutely everyone is guided by those principles, not selectively choosing from a menu, but rather in their entirety and as they are interlinked, including the principle of the sovereign equality of states. Then, working in favor of forming an honest balance of legitimate national interests, the legitimate national interests of all countries, we will be able to give life to the purpose of the UN that is enshrined in the Charter, to be a center for harmonizing the actions of nations. Thank you.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Alicia Bárcena Ibarra, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Mexico.
Mr. President, Señor Presidente.
President, distinguished delegates, I would like to convey to you the greetings of our President, Andrés Manuel López Obrador.
And I'm honored to come back to this General Assembly, where it was my home for many years, to address you now as a representative of Mexico. We are facing a turning point. The neoliberal hegemony has shown its palpable failure, given a model of extractivist development that only socializes losses, privatizes gains, impoverishes people, and devastates the planet. The arms races and wars are once again part of international geopolitics. The devastation of the environment is only continuing. Frustration and miscontent are fueling extremism in proposals that deny people's rights and once again deny democratic values. The institutions of the international system are losing legitimacy. This is what the Secretary General Antonio Guterres was referring to in his address when he spoke about a purgatory of polarity and instability, which are symptoms of civilization crises and stages of transition in which the old has not yet died and the new has not yet been born. The similarities between the current times and the interwar period in the last century is increasingly evident. They are also increasingly concerning because we know how things turned out then. Terrible years in which the global production became a conveyor belt for war, where humanity once just became one more good. However, history also teaches us that in these crises, with bravery and courage, it is possible to change the destructive path of destiny. In the interwar period last century, Mexico's foreign policy wrote an exceptional chapter showing humanism, solidarity, and respect for international law, which are characteristic of us. Mexico gave itself the task of upholding the value of the League of Nations, justice, self-determination, integrity, independence, and equality between its members. With these flags, we categorically condemned the arms race, the invasions of Manchuria, Austria, and Ethiopia, and the advance of fascism in Europe. And after the Second World War, Mexico led the declaration of Latin America and Caribbean as being an area free, a zone free of nuclear weapons. Today, like then, Mexico is trying to build emancipatory alternatives. This is part of our Mexican humanism, which is the result of our millennium-old history and compass in our project for national transformation, building a fair, equal, and fraternal society, a moral economy that guarantees the equal distribution of income and respect for the environment. This is a revolution of consciences, which has made it possible for us to change the increasingly precarious living conditions that our people had suffered before, during, and now things are different under the administration of Andrés Manuel López Obrador. Now, more than 9.5 million Mexicans have been brought out of poverty in 5 years, and the Gini coefficient has reached a historic low. The minimum wage has gone up by 135%, which has dispelled the inflationary myths that of those who wish to maintain the status quo. We've also got rid of tax breaks, strengthening the public coffers and putting an end to corruption and tax evasion and avoidance. All of this has been done against a backdrop of responsible public finances, which has made Mexico a destination for investment. We've also taken unprecedented measures at the constitutional level to recognize the rights of indigenous peoples, to guarantee the equality and political participation of women, and also to leave a clear legacy of social achievements in our constitution so that nobody can deprive future generations of these things. These premises are also reflected in our foreign policy, because Mexico is a country of migrants, and we are no strangers to any stage of the migratory cycle. In line with our experience, we have rolled out the Mexican model for human mobility. This is a proposal that aims to manage migration comprehensively in a holistic way to deal with its structural causes and with hemispheric cooperation. The model has 5 pillars: empowering Mexican communities abroad and advocating the United States to adopt ways for them to be fully regularized. Secondly, to beef up and broaden cooperation for development in communities of origin and return. 3, to address the political factors and economic sanctions that prevent development, hamper development, and lead to irregular migration. 4th, to bring about safe, orderly, and regular ways of people to move to get work. We have said it loud and clear. Migration is not a problem, it is a phenomenon. It's not a crime, and migrants are not criminals. The problem is the factors that lead people to leave their homes and the dangers that they're facing when they don't find legal ways to migrate and practices that criminalize them. From this rostrum, we rightly recognize the contributions of more than 37 million Mexicans who live in the United States. They are very able workers who provide $324 billion per year to this country's GDP, and they are critical for the economy of both countries. We have been able to change the narrative and conversation with the United States to focus on the structural causes. We have also convened leaders of the countries of origin in the region in Palenque with strategic agreements that have been able to reduce clashes on the border between Mexico and the United States by 66%. We also said loud and clear that development and stability will not be the norm of the international system unless we guarantee the rights and inclusion of women. As the first country in the Global South to adopt a feminist foreign policy, we hosted the 3rd Ministerial Conference on Feminist Foreign Policies. And in the declaration, the conference recognized a range of commitments that are reflected in the Pact of the Future. But just this week, only 9 women, heads of state and government, actually spoke at this rostrum. Only 9 out of 133 countries. The world cannot make headway without half of its population. Never again anything about us without us, because the future will be feminist or it will not. As Nicholas Stern said, climate change is the greatest market failure of all time, and it is also the greatest global challenge that we have. The only way to mitigate it is to take collective and simultaneous measures. These require financing, and they require that countries fulfill shared, common but differentiated responsibilities. We reiterate our commitment to the Paris Agreement, the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal framework, and the Biodiversity Convention, and the synergies between the 3 Rio Conventions. We need to restore the integrity of our ecosystems as providers of essential goods and services for the economy and for social well-being, and also for climate stability. We have taken part in the consultative processes of the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea, ITLOS, the Inter-American Court on Human Rights, and the International Court of Justice on states' responsibility vis-à-vis climate change. We will continue to work to achieve the ratification of the agreement on the conservation of marine biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction, and to maintain the moratorium on mining extraction on the seabed. The security context in the world, friends, is changing enormously. We are alarmed by the growing various threats to international peace and security, particularly the violations of the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations and the increasing risks of a nuclear war, the greatest threat that humanity has ever faced. Against this backdrop, we defend the territorial integrity in all geographical contexts, including in Ukraine and Palestine. We're in favor of a political solution and negotiations that include both parties, Russia and Ukraine. In this regard, we welcome the initiative of Brazil and China on there being a group for peace set up in New York. The war has gone on too long, and it affects us all. We're all losers, apart from the mercenaries of death, apart from those arms companies that are making money out of suffering and the losses of millions of people, children, and the destruction of entire families. Against this concerning backdrop, we need to redouble our efforts to eliminate nuclear weapons. Their devastating effects cannot be contained in space or in time, and that is why they are contrary to international law and the survival of humanity. But firearms are also a source of violence and insecurity throughout the world. Mexico is suffering from the flow of more than 500,000 weapons into its territory every year. They flow in illegally. The arms industry needs to be held accountable for its negligence, and Mexico has turned to the courts with this in mind. We are convinced that the arms industry is a key part of the expansion of this problem, as well as how to solve it. Mexico is well aware of how the illegal flow of weapons is the other side of the coin of the illegal flow of drugs and our organized crime, in particular in our country's northern border. Friends, humanity in Gaza has shown itself to be bankrupt, given the inaction of the international community. More than 70% of the victims of this war have been children, women and children. More than 85% of civilians have had to flee their homes. Most of the people there lack access to food, water, and electricity. That is why we requested to intervene in the case brought by South Africa before the ICJ on the implementation of the International Convention on the application of the Convention on Genocide. And together with Chile, we referred the situation in Palestine to the ICC, and we also sent an amicus brief to the court to highlight the court's jurisdiction. We reject the false dilemma between sterile violence of terrorism and the disproportionate punishment wrought by governments who are blinded by the double standard. To make the two-state solution a reality, the United Nations resolutions need to be adhered to, as well as the ruling of the ICJ on practices in the occupied Palestinian territory. The institutions and rules underpinning our international system are the last line before barbarism. That is why we categorically condemn the flagrant violations by the current Ecuadorian government of the most basic standards of international coexistence and the principles of the United Nations Charter, with their violent, illegal break-in of our embassy in Quito on the night of the 5th of April, the attack on our diplomats, and the illegal abduction of one person to whom Mexico had given political asylum, who remains a prisoner and who is seriously ill. We reiterate our thanks to the international community for the widespread condemnation of this fact. We cannot forget it or normalize it. Dear friends, we know one thing, which is that the United Nations Security Council needs urgent reform. Mexico proposes eliminating the veto entirely, and until that is not achieved, at least limiting the veto to in cases of genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. Our region, Latin America and the Caribbean, is one of our priorities because the progress of any of our countries means the progress of all. Defending dialogue, stability, democracy, and in so doing, we proposed the peaceful settlement of disputes, and we have been guarantors in the peace process between the government of Colombia and the ELN. And we have hosted 2 cycles of negotiations. We've also hosted talks between the government of Venezuela, the Democratic Unitary Platform, and the United States. Following principles of solidarity, self-determination, and the well-being of people, we will continue to be involved in supporting Haiti in rebuilding its stability and security. We reiterate our condemnation of the economic embargo imposed on Cuba for more than 6 decades. This violates international law, and we believe that Cuba must immediately be taken off the United States list of countries alleged to be sponsors of terrorism. Mexico, honoring its tradition of asylum throughout our history, offers political asylum to people who are threatened for their lives and freedom. We provide refuge to tens of thousands of asylum applicants and additional protection as a country that opens its doors to those who need it. Dear friends, On the 1st of October, we will inaugurate the administration of the first female president in 200 years of our country, Dr. Claudia Scheinbaum. With her leadership, the humanist government will indeed. Thank you very much. The first woman. With her leadership, the humanist government will deepen efforts to combat poverty and inequality, will focus on well-being in the shared prosperity, because the equality for women has now arrived, and protecting the environment and respecting our national heritage. We have to work together. Our foreign policy will continue to deploy our highest values, focusing on our roots and our struggles. We offered hope in the face of fear, solidarity in the face of hatred, and humanism in the face of devastation. Ours is a world that offers a backdrop that is somewhat dispiriting. Citizens around the world are finding little that gives rise to optimism. Every day we see on our screens scenes of cruelty and the almost arithmetic, mechanical reporting of how many people have died. Many people are looking at the United Nations now, at this House, and legitimately looking, given the intelligence that you can see in these rooms, looking for us to be in line with our promise and to ensure that dialogue and diplomacy can prevail. And rightly, they're frustrated to see that rather than brotherhood, rather than the collective defense of human dignity, rather than applying equal standards in international law, instead of this, factional geopolitical interests are being imposed and shameful double standards. And without any kind of shame, there is this naked empire of force being used, which is another way of saying the obscene concentration of power in the handful of a few who benefit from the status quo, the privileged, and those who find this situation profitable. The misery and blood of so many people, simple externalities that are not reflected in their balance sheets. We, the nations of the world, built this house, the United Nations, to forge a different path. And today we say that in spite of all of its shortcomings, it is this civilizational work that deserves our commitment and, if necessary, reasonable alternatives. These are the foundations that the human family laid down after the two world wars, the tool that we had to use. But today we see it appears to be impotent, inert, faced with the rage of barbarism, helpless given that its mission is being frustrated. We need to sow new seeds of hope, changing governance and architecture, because almost decades on, the world, its challenges and its physiognomy can no longer be recognized in a mirror that obstinately reflects the world of 1945. We need to recover trust in multilateralism and its institutions, in agreement and cooperation, in the belief that in spite of our rich diversity of colors and geographies, we are brothers and sisters belonging to the same community, the same planet, with the same destiny. That is why the Pact of the Future convenes us to renew this commitment, to vanquish fear and mistrust, and to recover legitimacy in this organization to which we belong. In this path, in the building of a fair world, you will always find in Mexico a loyal companion, a committed partner, and a fraternal brother. We need to take ownership of today to build tomorrow. And as José Emilio Pacheco said on the eve of another era in 1968, he said, "One world is falling apart, another world is being born. The darkness surrounds us, but the light is glimmering. Everything," he said, "there is no hope, but there is life, and everything belongs to us." And I would also like to quote Eduardo Galeano, who said, "What if we start to exercise the never-before-proclaimed right to dream? What if we are delirious for a while at the beginning of this millennium, forcing ourselves to look away from the infamy to dream another world, a world where justice and freedom, Siamese sisters condemned to live separately, will once again sit side by side, one where we'll be compatriots and compatriots of all of those who are determined to seek justice, wherever they may have been born, and wherever they may live, or when they may have lived, without any regard being given at all to the borders of the map or time. Thank you.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Mexico. I now give the floor to His Excellency Espen Barth Eide, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Norway.
President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, our United Nations was born as the Second World War ended, shattered by the experiences of two devastating wars with their unspeakable atrocities. Wise people came together to write the United Nations Charter and to establish the United Nations Organization. The Charter codifies the key principles of international law, including the prohibition of the use of force, but in self-defense or upon the authority of the Security Council. Effectively, wars of aggression were outlawed, whereas the inherent right to self-defense was reconfirmed. In the Charter, and flowing from it in the years to come, we also established the other key principles that codify international humanitarian law, as well as international human rights law. This is the quintessential set of principles that shall govern international relations. However, our Secretary General was perfectly right when he pointed out that if violations and abuse is allowed to continue with impunity, the very foundations of the UN Charter is under threat. And indeed, they are under threat. President, for the first time in 79 years, we have a major interstate war in Europe. In its war of aggression against Ukraine, Russia is in blatant violation of the very essence of the Charter. It violates the principle of sovereignty, inalienability of borders, and the prohibition of use of force against the territorial integrity and political independence of another member state. These principles safeguard the equality of all states, large and small, always and everywhere, and are fundamental for member states' security. Norway stands by Ukraine. Like so many friends of a free and independent Ukraine, we contribute significant military and civilian assistance, and we are determined to do so as long as it takes. We want Ukraine to prevail. We want peace in Ukraine, but it must be a just peace in line with the key principles of the UN Charter. An unjust peace would imply that we, once again, are living in a world where might makes right and where borders can be changed by force. We must all reject such an outcome. It would set a terrible precedent. My fellow delegates, even wars have rules. International humanitarian law, as embodied in the Geneva Conventions, lays out the key principles of distinction and proportionality. Warring parties are obliged to follow these rules, irrespective of whether the war itself is legal. Every member of this assembly is bound by the Geneva Conventions. They are as much a part of our common commitment to a rules-based order as the Charter itself. The principles under international humanitarian law are obligatory, not optional. For the rules to work, we have to be consistent in their application. We must treat similar cases similarly, irrespective of the context. We must speak out if our adversaries violate these rules. It is equally important that we speak out if our traditional friends violate them. In fact, It is in the latter case that we demonstrate that we do see these rules as universal. President, almost a year has passed since Hamas's heinous terror attack on Israel on October 7. Its effect on Israeli society can hardly be overestimated. We condemn these horrific acts in the strongest possible terms. The hostages that are still in Hamas captivity must be released immediately and without conditions. There is no doubt in our mind that Israel, like any other state, has a right to defend itself against terrorism. At the same time, Israel, like any other state, is bound by international humanitarian law. The immense suffering inflicted on the Palestinian population in Gaza is beyond comparison. Much of Gaza has been turned into rubble. At least 41,000 people have been killed, and many more are injured and maimed for life. I echo the Secretary General when he says that nothing can justify such collective punishment. Norway was among the very first Western countries to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. We have condemned the violations of international humanitarian law. We have expressed great concern about the severe limitations of humanitarian access and the shocking number of UN staff, aid workers, and journalists killed. We stood on UNRWA's side when it was subjected to a smear and defamation. While so many countries suspended their funding, we increased ours, and we reached out to co-donors to encourage them to return. I'm pleased to see that almost all donors are now back. President, the Middle East is going through one of its darkest hours. In the West Bank, illegal Israeli settlements are expanding at an alarming pace. Settler violence is rampant. And as we have gathered here at the UN this very week, Lebanon has seen its deadliest days in decades. We are at the brink of a major regional war. Even neighboring countries that long ago entered into peace agreements with Israel are under immense pressure. The situation is worsening by the hour. And make no mistakes, the conflicts in the region are deeply intertwined. Yesterday, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed this assembly. His core message was that we all have to choose. Either we are with Israel or we are with Iran and its proxies. He also stated that there could only be peace once Hezbollah and Hamas were totally defeated. President, we have seen this film before. I didn't like the ending. 22 years ago, in response to the terrorist attacks on this very city, another leader stated that we were either with him or with the terrorists. This division into a simplistic notion of black and white, leaving no space for nuance or complexity, let alone impartiality, and with an excessive trust in military force alone, is utterly dangerous. And indeed, it did not end well. We need to learn from past mistakes. However, President, in every crisis lies an opportunity. I remain convinced that there is no credible alternative for lasting peace other than a two-state solution. While ceasefires in Gaza and in Lebanon are most urgently needed, ending hostilities must not be confused with lasting solutions. Serious thinking is required here and now to prepare for the day after. 2 days ago, almost 100 member states took part in a meeting called by Saudi Arabia, the European Union, and Norway, launching a global alliance to implement the two-state solution. 3 decades after the Oslo Accords, more and more states are realizing that endlessly waiting for the right moment to negotiate will not work. I call on those states that have not yet done so to recognize the state of Palestine and to allow it to become a full member of this organization. We call on everyone who can to help to build Palestine's institutions and on regional actors to help embed a political settlement in a broader regional framework. President, we are witnessing from the front row the shortcomings of the institutions that we established in 1945. The adoption of the Pact for the Future is a major success for this United Nations. With this, we have resolved to update our institutions and our practices across the three pillars of peace and security, development, and human rights. We also opened our conversation about the critically important issue of how to make artificial intelligence a force for good. President, Norway supports a reform of the Security Council that makes it both more representative and more efficient. Both permanent and elected seats should be added, and the historical injustice to Africa should be mended. The use of the veto should be limited rather than expanded. When the UN Charter was drafted, Norway was an early proponent of the principle that no state should vote in its own case. And indeed, this principle is enshrined in the Charter in Article 27(3). This principle is, however, repeatedly ignored by the Security Council. But again, this principle is an obligation. It is not an option. To make our development efforts more efficient, we need to reform the international financial architecture. And in order to enhance the ability of states to provide essential services to their populations, it must be possible for them to tax their citizens and their companies. Norway will continue to be a driving force for international tax cooperation, including by supporting a UN framework convention. Central to the Pact of the Future are robust commitments to gender equality and women's rights. Inclusion must be at the forefront, not because it is the right thing to do, but because it is the smart thing to do. We need equitable societies. We must build more effective and accountable institutions, including in this very organization. President, the triple planetary crisis is mankind's most daunting challenge. To save our planet, we must adapt our economies. The future must be renewable, circular, and nature-friendly. There is good news, President. Despite increasing political divides, the last few years have seen that multilateralism can deliver when it comes to the relationship between us as mankind and our physical environment. In Dubai, we agreed to transition away from fossil fuels in a just, orderly, and equitable manner. In Montreal, we agreed to reset our partnership with nature. In Nairobi, we launched a negotiation process towards the treaty to end plastic pollution. And here in New York, we agreed to take better care of our common oceans. What is true for all these agreements and the Pact for the Future alike, however, is that the real verdict lies in our ability to implement them. We must act. We must act now. President, as we approach the 80th anniversary of this United Nations, we must step up our efforts to develop this organization so as to make it more transparent, more inclusive, and more representative of the world we live in today. Norway fully supports the integrity and independence of the Secretary General and his reform agenda. Reform will not be achieved through micromanagement. We, the member states, must provide the Secretary General with input and guidance. But we must also show trust and allocate resources to enable him to lead. When a new Secretary General shall be elected, we must ensure that she has the tools she needs to help us strategically deliver on the noble goals we have agreed upon. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Norway. I now give the floor to His Excellency Subrahmanyam Jaishankar, Minister for External Affairs of India.
Madam President, Excellencies, distinguished members of the General Assembly, greetings and namaskar from 1.4 billion people of Bharat. I congratulate the President of the General Assembly, His Excellency Mr. Philemon Yang, and strongly support the 79th UN General Assembly's theme of leaving no one behind. Madam President, we are gathered here at a difficult time. The world is yet to recover from the ravages of the COVID pandemic. A war in Ukraine is well into its third year. The conflict in Gaza is acquiring wider ramifications. Across the global south, development plans have gone off rails and SDG targets are receding. But there is more. Unfair trade practices threaten jobs, just as unviable projects raise debt levels. Any connectivity that flouts sovereignty and territorial integrity acquires strategic connotations, especially when it is not a shared endeavor. Technology advancements, which have long been a source of hope, are now equally a factor of anxiety. Climate events occur with greater intensity and frequency. Food security is as worrisome as health security. In truth, the world stands fractious, polarized, and frustrated. Conversations have become difficult, agreements even more so. This is surely not what the founders of the United Nations would have wanted of us. Madam President, almost exactly 8 decades ago, the first steps towards the formation of the UN were taken near here at Dumbarton Oaks. Refined thereafter at the Yalta Conference, they were finally approved in San Francisco. The debates of that era centered around how to ensure world peace, a prerequisite for global prosperity. Today, we find both peace and prosperity equally endangered. And that, Madam President, is because trust has eroded and processes have broken down. Countries have extracted more from the international system than they have put into it, enfeebling it in the process. We see that vividly in every challenge and every crisis. Reforming multilateralism is therefore an imperative. The urgency of this call is highlighted by the theme of this session. Leaving no one behind means advancing peace, ensuring sustainable development, and strengthening human dignity. This cannot be delivered by a UN paralyzed when faced with division, conflict, terrorism, and violence. Nor can it be advanced if access to food, fuel, and fertilizer is jeopardized. When capturing markets lacks restraint, it damages the livelihood and social fabric of others. Evasion of climate action responsibilities by the developed undermine the growth prospect of the developing. Indeed, when resource crunch limits the very pursuit of SDG targets, it is not just economies, but human dignity itself that is imperiled. If the world is in such a state, this body must ask itself, how has this come to pass? The problems arise from a combination of structural shortcomings, political calculations, naked self-interest, and yes, disregard for those left behind. It is natural to feel overwhelmed by what we confront now. After all, there are so many dimensions, different moving parts, issues of the day, and the changing landscape. But every change must begin somewhere, and there is no better place than where it all started. We, the members of the United Nations, must now seriously and purposefully address ourselves to that task. Not because it is a competition for influence or a squabble for positions, but because if we carry on like this, the state of the world is only going to get worse. And that could mean that more of us are going to be left behind. Madam President, as the world contemplates these concerns, India has sought to respond in a variety of ways. First, by focusing on the issues of the vulnerable, women, farmers, and youth, and fashioning targeted policies and initiatives for their betterment. Assured access to piped water, to electricity, to cooking gas, and new homes are changing millions of lives. The gender gap has started to close, be it in health, in education, or in the workplace. Our food producers, thrice a year, get financial support at the click of a button. And a third-term government has made skilling of the youth its key priority. Second, by expanding opportunities for employment and for entrepreneurship, including through stronger training and large-scale financial incentives. 495 mudra loans, 495 million mudra loans have been given to small businesses in the last decade. 67% of them are to women. Equally telling, 6.56 million street vendors have availed of 8.85 million Swanidhi loans. This is just in the last 4 years. 45% of the beneficiaries are again women. Third, by creating templates that are replicable elsewhere. It could be digital delivery or enhancing the quality of governance and public services, as indeed making medicines and health facilities accessible and affordable. A digital public infrastructure and a people's pharmacy are today examples of what India can readily offer to the world. It is also an alternative vision where technology is used to empower, not to dominate. Fourth, by encouraging the Global South to voice its shared concerns and come together. To that end, we have convened 3 Global South summits, the most recent in August of 2024. And fifth, by contributing to the well-being of the global commons and responding to the pressing needs of those in distress. This has ranged from undertaking projects in 78 nations, providing resources to neighbors, and responding to HADR situations, to supplying medicines and ensuring maritime safety and security. Madam President, given the scale of transformation underway in India, each of these dimensions underline that the world's problems can indeed be tackled, and that by working together, we can surely create a larger lifting tide. In these troubled times, it is necessary, Madam President, to provide hope and rekindle optimism. We have to demonstrate that big changes are possible and not over a long period. And nothing is more powerful in this regard than the transformative potential of the digital. We have seen its impact in our daily lives in India over the last decade. It is visible when public benefits from nutritional support and housing to energy and health are delivered efficiently and on a vast scale. Or when small business loans and farmers' support are extended without using intermediaries. In fact, when street vendors and expat workforce confidently use fintech in their regular transactions. When services delivery and benefits move seamlessly and transparently, less people will be left behind. That, Madam President, is India's experience and India's relevance. Such leapfrogging possibilities, coupled with people-centric policies and visionary leadership, can be real game changers.